Picture this, a scorching desert under the relentless sun, where nothing but shifting sands stretch to the horizon. Now imagine that same wasteland, hiding the ruins of towering cities, grand palaces, and forgotten empires. These barren landscapes were once the beating heart of human civilization, where ingenious cultures not only survived but thrived in conditions we'd consider uninhabitable today. Across the globe, from the Sahara to the Sonoran, from Arabia to the Atacama, deserts hold the secrets of 50 lost civilizations that mastered their harsh environments through breathtaking innovation. Some built underground cities to escape the heat. Others engineered sophisticated water systems to turn sand into farmland, and many vanished so completely that we're still piecing together their stories from fragments in the ruins. In this journey, we'll uncover how these ancient peoples transformed death valleys into thriving metropolises, why their empires crumbled into dust, and what their desert wisdom can teach us today. By the end, you'll never look at a barren landscape the same way again. The desert remembers even when the world forgets. Now let's step into the rose-red shadows of Petra, where the Nabateans carved an empire from stone. At first glance, this Jordanian wonder seems like a mirage, a city of towering facades chiseled directly into cliffs, its temples and tombs glowing pink in the desert sun. But Petra's true genius lies beneath the surface. The Nabateans weren't just master stonemasons, they were hydrological wizards. In a land where rain fell just once or twice a year, they engineered a labyrinth of channels, cisterns, and dams that harvested every precious drop. Their secret, a network of ceramic pipes lining the steep cliffs, funneling water from distant springs into the city's heart. Even today, these systems put modern desert engineering to shame. Some tunnels still function after 2,000 years. Petra wasn't just surviving, it thrived as the Silk Road's ultimate toll booth. Picture caravans of frankincense and spices snaking through the Sick, the narrow canyon entrance that acted as a natural fortress. The Nabateans taxed every passing merchant, growing wealthy enough to build monuments like the treasury, its columns adorned with deities from Greece, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. This was a crossroads of cultures where a desert tribe became cosmopolitan middlemen, fluent in the languages and customs of empires. Then, almost overnight, Petra emptied. By the 4th century, the city was nearly abandoned, its grand buildings left to the wind. Why? Some blame the Roman Empire, which annexed Petra and rerouted trade to the sea, starving the city of its lifeblood. Others point to climate shifts. Tree rings revealed devastating droughts during Petra's decline. But the most haunting theory involves earthquakes. In 363 AD, a massive quake shattered the region, collapsing the very water systems that made life possible here. Without water, even the Nabatean stone masterpiece couldn't endure. Today, Petra whispers its lessons. The same cracks that drained ancient reservoirs now threaten the ruins as flash floods erode the soft sandstone. Archaeologists race to restore the Nabateans' hydraulic genius, hoping to protect what's left, because Petra isn't just a relic, it's a warning. In an era of rising temperatures and dwindling resources, the desert hasn't forgotten how quickly even the mightiest civilizations can vanish when the water runs dry. Now let's journey southwest to the blistering sands of the Sahara, where the Garamantes defied the desert with an underground miracle. While Petra mastered water above ground, these Libyan innovators built their empire beneath it. Imagine a civilization thriving in one of Earth's harshest environments, not by chance but by engineering. The Garamantes dug thousands of miles of Fagara's subterranean tunnels that tapped into ancient aquifers, turning the Sahara's depths into a life-giving network. These weren't simple ditches, they were precision-carved channels, some plunging over 100 feet underground, with vertical shafts spaced like clockwork to maintain airflow and allow maintenance. Each drop of water was measured, each grain of soil nurtured. Their mastery didn't stop at irrigation. the Garamantes cultivated olives, grapes, and wheat in valleys that today are dust bowls. Archaeologists have found grindstones and grape presses, proof that this was no subsistence society. They produced wine and olive oil for trade across the Mediterranean. Their cities, like Germa, boasted multi-story buildings and public baths, luxuries unthinkable in such a hostile landscape. And their reach, caravans of chariots, not camels, crossed the desert to trade with Rome and Carthage, proving the Sahara was never the barrier we imagine. Yet by the 5th century, the Fogaras ran dry. What happened? The answer lies in climate shifts and overreach. Tree rings and sediment cores reveal a grim pattern. As aquifers drained faster than they could recharge, the land began to collapse. The Garamantes had gambled on water that took millennia to accumulate, using it in mere centuries. Some scholars argue Roman demand for their goods accelerated the crisis, pushing their systems beyond sustainability. Others point to a broader aridification of the Sahara as monsoon patterns shifted northward. The most haunting clue comes from their own records. Inscriptions tell of kings ordering new Fogaras, digging deeper, chasing water further underground, a desperate race against time. By the time the Byzantines arrived, the Garamantes were shadows, their cities crumbling back into the dunes. Today, their tunnels still snake beneath the sand, some eerily intact, others collapsed like the civilization they sustained. Modern satellite imagery reveals over 1,000 Fogaras, a ghostly grid mapping the ambition and hubris of a people who bent the desert to their will until the desert won. Their legacy whispers a warning. In Libya's Fezzan region, farmers still repair ancient Fogaras, clinging to the Garamantes' wisdom. But as modern wells drain aquifers faster than ever, we're repeating their story. The Sahara hasn't forgotten how to reclaim what was always hers. Leaving the vanished Fogaras of the Garamantes behind, we now turn our gaze southeast to the sun-baked lands along the Nile, where the Kingdom of Kush rose as Egypt's fiery rival and cultural equal. This was no backwater dynasty. Kushites didn't just imitate their northern neighbors, they surpassed them in ambition, constructing more pyramids in a single century than Egypt did in a millennium. Picture the desert horizon near modern-day Sudan, studded with over 200 steep-sided pyramids at sites like Nuri and Meroe, their sharp angles cutting against the sky like defiant announcements of Kushite might. What set these structures apart wasn't just their number, but their innovation. While Egyptian pyramids prioritized grandeur, Kushite builders focused on efficiency. They used smaller blocks, steeper slopes, and compact designs, creating monuments that could be built faster and withstand the desert's wrath. Some were topped with intricate carvings of birds and lotus flowers, blending Egyptian motifs with distinctly African artistry. The burial chambers beneath held clues to a society that revered both its warriors and its queen's female rulers like Amanianas, who led armies against Rome, were buried with the same reverence as kings. The rivalry with Egypt was a dance of domination and imitation. For centuries, Kush supplied gold, ivory, and enslaved soldiers to pharaohs, even ruling Egypt as the 25th dynasty around 700 BC. Their pharaohs, like Taharqa, erected statues along the Nile Delta, proclaiming themselves the true heirs of Egyptian gods. But when Assyrian invaders pushed Kush back south, they didn't fade. Instead, they reinvented themselves at Meroe, developing their own script now called Meroitic, one of Africa's oldest written languages, and smelting iron in furnace bellows stoked by Sahara winds. Yet the desert's advance proved a fiercer enemy than any army. As rainfall patterns shifted around 300 CE, the Butona grasslands around Meroe dried into dust. Archaeologists find livestock bones in kitchen refuse, shrinking over time, cattle replaced by goats, then by scraggly sheep as pastures vanished. The iron industry, dependent on charcoal from dwindling acacia trees, sputtered out. Even the Nile's annual floods grew erratic, leaving Kush's famed agricultural basins cracked and barren. the final blow came from an unexpected direction. Axum, a rising power in Ethiopia, exploited Kush's resource scarcity by cutting off trade routes to the Red Sea. Without iron exports or gold to barter, Kush's kings could no longer maintain their armies or temples. The last known pyramid inscription dates to around 350 CE, a plea to the god Apedemak for rain that never came. Today, wind erosion exposes the foundations of Mara's palaces, revealing how sand infiltrated the very walls. But Kush's influence lingers. The Nubian traditions of Sudan still celebrate Ammoniana's defiance, and modern architects study their pyramid techniques for building in arid zones. Like the Garamantes, the Kushites mastered their environment until the environment mastered them. Their story whispers across millennia. Even empires forged in fire eventually return to dust. Now let's journey eastward from the fading embers of Kush to the vast Thar Desert, where the Indus Valley civilization secretly thrived in places modern satellites are only now revealing. Hidden beneath the arid sands of what is now Western India and Pakistan, outposts like Dolavira tell a story of urban genius far ahead of its time. Imagine a city built to outsmart the desert. Dolavira's grid-patterned streets, uncovered by aerial surveys, show meticulous planning reservoirs carved from bedrock to store monsoon rains, drainage systems that would put modern engineers to shame, and even a sophisticated water filtration system using cascading stone tanks. This wasn't just survival, it was a civilization engineering miracles in a land that receives less than 10 inches of rain a year. What's truly staggering is their adaptability. While most associate the Indus Valley with the fertile floodplains of the Indus River, their desert settlements prove they colonized the harshest environments. At Dolavira, archaeologists found massive stone gates and ceremonial plazas, suggesting it was a trade hub linking the Arabian Sea coast to inland cities. Artifacts like Mesopotamian seals and Afghan lapis lazuli confirm their global connections, all managed without the swords or slavery common in contemporary empires. But how did such a water-wise society vanish? The answer may lie in the very rivers they depended on. Sediment cores from the nearby Gaga Hakra basin, once thought to be mythical, reveal it was a mighty Himalayan-fed river system during Dolavira's peak. Then, around 3,900 years ago, seismic shifts redirected its waters, turning the Gaga into a ghost river. Tree rings from the period show decades-long droughts, while Dolavira's later layers contain desperate attempts to dig deeper wells. The end came not with fire or war, but with thirst. Excavations show orderly abandonment, precious goods carefully stored, doors sealed, as residents likely migrated toward the Ganges basin. Yet their legacy persists. The same water conservation techniques seen at Dolavira are still used in Rajasthan stepwells today, proving even deserts remember their masters. Now let's sail across the sands of time to Bahrain, where the Dilmun civilization once turned barren islands into a legendary trading paradise. Nestled in the Persian Gulf, Dilmun was the silent middleman of the ancient world, a place so prosperous it inspired myths of eternal life in Sumerian epics. Picture a bustling harbor where Mesopotamian copper met Indus Valley gems. Dilmun's merchants didn't just trade goods, they traded ideas. Archaeological digs at sites like Kalat al-Bahrain reveal a cosmopolitan hub with seals from modern-day Pakistan, pottery from Syria, and even gold artifacts tracing back to Egypt. This was the Amazon of the Bronze Age, a neutral ground where rival empires did business without bloodshed, but Dilmun's real genius lay beneath its soil. While surrounded by salt water, the civilization mastered freshwater agriculture through ingenious wells tapping into underground springs. Date palms and barley flourished where they shouldn't have, turning these islands into a breadbasket for passing ships. Their irrigation systems were so advanced that traces still hydrate Bahrain's farms today. Then, the land began to betray them. Core samples from buried fields tell a grim story, rising salt concentrations as irrigation water evaporated, leaving behind toxic crystals. By 2,100 years ago, wheat yields plummeted by nearly 70%. Farmers switched to salt-tolerant dates, but even these struggled as groundwater turned brackish. The same trade networks that enriched Dilmun now carried its desperate exports, salt itself, mined from ruined fields and shipped as a commodity. Climate change played the final card. As Persian Gulf waters rose, seawater intruded further inland, contaminating wells. Tablets from neighboring civilizations note Dilmun's dates, once famed for their sweetness, now arriving shriveled and bitter. By the time Alexander's scouts mapped the region, Dilmun was already a ghost of its legends, its great temples swallowed by salty marshes, yet its legacy floats on. Modern Bahrain still uses Dilmun-era well designs, and the ancient trade routes they pioneered now see oil tankers tracing the same paths. Even the myth of Dilmun as a paradise persists, echoed in the Quran's description of eternal gardens, a bittersweet reminder that no civilization, however ingenious, can outrun the land that feeds it. Moving deeper into the sands of Arabia, we uncover the enigmatic story of the Thamudic people, a civilization carved literally into the face of history. These pre-Islamic tribes left behind a silent legacy etched in stone, their rock inscriptions scattering the deserts like whispers from the past. Imagine standing before a cliff face in Al-Ula or Madain Sale, where intricate carvings depict camels, hunting scenes, and even early forms of writing, a vivid snapshot of life over 2,000 years ago. The Thamud thrived in one of the harshest environments on Earth, transforming barren landscapes into thriving communities, their most astonishing feats. The monumental tombs and dwellings they chiseled directly into sandstone mountains. These weren't just shelters, they were statements of power and artistry, with facades mimicking the grand architecture of their trading partners, the Nabateans. Some scholars believe the Thamud might have even influenced Petra's famous rock-cut designs, a testament to their engineering prowess. But what truly sets the Thamud apart is their presence in religious texts. The Quran recounts their story as a cautionary tale, a people gifted with fertile lands and advanced skills who, according to scripture, faced divine retribution for their arrogance. Surah Al-Araf describes how they arrogantly demanded proof of God's will by challenging the prophet Salih to make a pregnant camel emerge from solid rock. When their demands were met, they slaughtered the sacred animal, triggering their downfall. Whether literal or metaphorical, these accounts hint at a civilization that pushed its luck too far. Archaeology offers competing theories. Excavations reveal evidence of a sudden catastrophe, collapsed buildings and layers of sediment suggesting massive flash floods, a deadly threat in Arabia's wadis. Others point to military conquest, as Roman records mention campaigns against Thamudani tribes, and Nabatean inscriptions boast of defeating them in battle. The truth might lie in a combination of factors: environmental stress weakening their defenses, followed by opportunistic invaders. One intriguing clue comes from their own inscriptions. Unlike the boastful kings of Mesopotamia, Thamudic carvings often express anxiety, prayers for rain, warnings about droughts, and pleas to deities for protection. This vulnerability contrasts sharply with their monumental architecture, painting a picture of a society aware of its fragility. Today, their ghostly ruins stand as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, while debates about their fate continue. Were they wiped out by an angry god, as scripture suggests? Or did climate shifts and rival armies tear apart a civilization that once mastered the desert? Either way, the Thamud serve as a haunting reminder that even the mightiest stone cities can crumble when nature or human pride turns against them. Now, let's journey from the carved cliffs of the Thamud to the shimmering mirages of Oman's empty quarter, where whispers of a legendary city have tantalized explorers for centuries. They called it Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands, a place so wealthy it drowned in its own decadence. Bedouin storytellers spoke of towering palaces brimming with frankincense, where merchants draped in gold bartered under jeweled archways until the earth swallowed the city whole as punishment for its greed. For generations, scholars dismissed Ubar as pure myth, a desert mirage conjured by sunstruck travelers. But what if the truth was buried beneath the dunes all along? The turning point came in the 1990s when satellite imagery revealed faint geometric patterns near Shisar, Oman, ghostly outlines of walls and wells hidden under centuries of sand. Archaeologists rushed to the site, uncovering a fortress-like structure with 8 towers and a deep central well, all partially collapsed into a massive sinkhole. Pottery shards and frankincense burners confirmed this was no ordinary settlement. It was a hub of the ancient spice trade, thriving at the crossroads of camel routes that stretched from Yemen to Mesopotamia. Radiocarbon dating placed its peak between 300 BC and 300 AD, aligning perfectly with the era when frankincense was worth its weight in gold. But here's where science clashes with legend. Bedouin tales describe Ubar's demise as a single, cataclysmic event, divine retribution that sent the city screaming into the abyss. The archaeology tells a slower, more complex story. The sinkhole likely formed as groundwater dissolved limestone caverns beneath the city, causing gradual subsidence over decades. Meanwhile, trade records from Rome and Persia hint at Ubar's decline long before its collapse, as maritime routes replaced perilous desert caravans. By the time the final walls crumbled, the city may have been a shadow of its former self, its wealth and influence already leaching away like water into sand. Yet the myth persists, and for good reason. Ubar's ruins offer eerie proof of how easily reality blurs with folklore. The very ground here is treacherous, with sandstone crusts hiding caverns that can swallow a jeep whole. It's easy to imagine ancient travelers witnessing a tower's sudden collapse and spinning tales of a city cursed by the heavens. Even today, Bedouin guides refuse to camp near the site, whispering that jinns still guard Ubar's shattered gates. So was Ubar the sin-drenched metropolis of legend, or simply a pragmatic trading post undone by geology and shifting economics? Perhaps it's both, a place where human ambition met the desert's indifference, leaving behind a story so potent it refuses to be buried. As the winds reshape the dunes, one truth remains. In the empty quarter, even the mightiest cities are just guests, and the sand always has the final word. As we shift our gaze from the golden mirages of Ubar to the rugged landscapes of the American Southwest, another civilization story emerges, one etched into towering cliffs and whispered by the wind through ancient ruins. The Anasazi, ancestors of today's Pueblo peoples, carved their legacy into the very bones of Chaco Canyon, creating a world where architecture and astronomy danced in harmony. Imagine standing beneath the sandstone walls of Pueblo Bonito, the grandest of the canyon's great houses, its hundreds of rooms stacked like a celestial ladder toward the sky. Built between 900 and 1150 AD, this was no ordinary settlement. The Anasazi engineered their buildings with precision, aligning doorways and windows to capture the solstice sun and the cycles of the moon. Even their roads, stretching over 150 miles in arrow straight lines, suggest a culture deeply attuned to the cosmos. But what makes Chaco truly extraordinary is how these people thrived in a land that defies survival. The canyon receives less than 9 inches of rain a year, yet the Anasazi cultivated crops, engineered intricate water catchment systems, and traded turquoise and macaw feathers from as far away as Central America. Then, around 1150 AD, the canyon fell silent. Rooms that once echoed with ceremony were left filled with untouched pottery, as if the inhabitants walked away mid-meal. For decades, archaeologists pointed to a 50-year megadrought as the obvious culprit. Tree rings from the period confirm the land turned to dust, with springs drying up and crops failing. But newer research complicates this tidy narrative. Some scholars argue the Anasazi didn't just flee, they transformed. evidence shows many migrated to places like Mesa Verde and the Rio Grande Valley, adapting their cliff-dwelling skills to new terrains. Others suggest social unrest played a role, with signs of defensive structures and even cannibalism hinting at desperation. Then there's the spiritual angle. The Anasazi's world was steeped in ritual, from their kivas subterranean ceremonial chambers to their reverence for celestial events. Could a breakdown in their cosmic order have prompted a spiritual exodus? Today, Chaco's ruins hum with unanswered questions. Why build such monumental structures in a place so harsh? Why abandon them so completely? The canyon offers no easy answers, only silent testimony to a people who bent the desert to their will until the desert, as it always does, bent them back. As sunlight filters through a lone window in Pueblo Bonito, painting a golden square on an ancient floor, you're left wondering if the Anasazi didn't vanish at all, but simply stepped into the shadows, waiting for us to piece together their story. Leaving behind the sun-baked cliffs of Chaco Canyon, we journey now to the stark coastal plains of Peru, where the Moche civilization defied another extreme landscape. While not a desert in the classic sense, this arid strip between the Andes and the Pacific Ocean presented its own brutal challenges the Moche met with staggering ingenuity. Picture this, a land where rain might not fall for years, yet fields burst with peanuts, squash, and vivid purple corn. The Moche, who thrived from 100 to 800 AD, engineered this miracle through miles of canals diverting water from distant rivers. Their acequias were so precisely sloped that modern engineers still study them. But their mastery didn't stop at agriculture. Take the Huaca del Sol, a pyramid made of over 140 million adobe bricks, each stamped with its maker's mark. Nearby, the Huaca de la Luna flaunts murals in colors still vibrant after 15 centuries, depicting their gods with fanged smiles and scenes of ritual warfare. What truly set the Moche apart was their intimate dance with chaos. Their art, exquisite gold nose rings, pottery showing surgical procedures, reveals a society obsessed with balance. They fished from reed boats in one of the world's richest marine ecosystems, yet their temples show constant reverence for mountain spirits who controlled the rivers. This duality hints at their deepest understanding, that abundance here depended on forces beyond their control. Then, around 600 AD, their world unraveled. Archaeologists peeling back layers at Huaca de la Luna found something chilling. Entire walls had been hastily replastered after mud damage, suggesting catastrophic floods. Sediment cores from the coast tell the fuller story. An El Niño event, possibly the most severe in 2,000 years, pounded the region. Rivers burst their banks, drowning canals under silt, while ocean currents shifted, starving fishermen's nets. But here's the twist: the Moche didn't collapse overnight. Some rebuilt inland, adapting their canal networks. Others, like the site of Galindo, show signs of social breakdown. Elite compounds burned, artworks smashed. Sand layers in their fields suggest climate shifts turned marginal lands barren. The final blow may have been sand dunes creeping inland as winds changed, swallowing their hard-won fields. Today, their legacy lingers in Peru's coastal towns, where farmers still use Moche-style irrigation. Their story is a reminder that even the most resilient cultures walk a knife's edge between adaptation and oblivion. As you stand where the Pacific meets the desert, watching mist roll over the Huacas, ask yourself, did the Moche fall to nature's whims, or was it their very mastery that left them vulnerable when those whims changed? Now, shifting our gaze from the flooded plains of Peru, we venture across the Atlantic to the stark, wind-scoured landscapes of Mauritania, where the Tichet culture carved out an improbable oasis of civilization in one of the harshest deserts on Earth. These were not just survivors, but innovators building West Africa's oldest known stone-walled settlements over 3,000 years ago, a full millennium before the rise of ancient Ghana. Imagine a labyrinth of circular compounds stretching across the sandstone plateaus of the Tagant Cliffs, each wall meticulously stacked without mortar. The largest Dihar Tichet covered nearly 80 acres, equivalent to 60 football fields, with granaries designed to keep harvests safe from both raiders and rodents. What's extraordinary is how they thrived here. Satellite imagery reveals a now vanished network of seasonal lakes and pastures where the Tichet people mastered a delicate balancing act. Their cattle, long-horned beasts depicted in rock art, were both wealth and vulnerability. Dung layers in archaeological sites tell a story of careful rotation, moving herds between pastures to prevent overgrazing. They supplemented this with pearl millet, the earliest evidence of domesticated grain in Africa, grown in fields irrigated by ingenious check dams that trapped fleeting rainwater. Pottery shards still bear the fingerprints of artisans who traded salt and copper across the Sahara, their geometric patterns echoing in modern Mauritanian textiles. Yet by 500 BC, the walls stood empty. Pollen samples from ancient lakebeds paint a grim picture. As the climate grew drier, cattle densities spiked around remaining water sources. The very grasses that sustained them, like panicum and cenchrus, disappear from the record, replaced by desert shrubs. At Dihar Nema, archaeologists found something eerie. The bones of starved cows piled near collapsed wells, their ribs splayed like the spokes of broken wheels. Some scholars argue this was more than climate change. The Tichet might have been victims of their own success, their population growth outpacing the land's ability to recover. But don't mistake this for a simple cautionary tale. Today's nomadic Imragan fishermen, who still use Tichet-style smoked fish preservation techniques, are living proof of cultural endurance. And in a twist of irony, those abandoned stone walls now shelter endangered Barbary sheep from poachers. The Tichet's legacy whispers a timeless truth, that even in the face of collapse, human ingenuity leaves marks too deep for the desert sands to fully erase. Turning our attention to the sun-baked coasts of eastern Arabia, we uncover the story of the Jerhans, a civilization whose wealth was literally carried on the winds, the fragrant winds of frankincense. While most desert cultures battled scarcity, the Jerhans thrived by mastering something even more elusive than water, the art of turning aromatic tree resin into an empire. Picture a city shimmering like a mirage on the edge of the empty quarter, where warehouses overflowed with frankincense so precious that Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder claimed it consumed a third of Rome's annual foreign expenditures. Jerha's merchants didn't just trade goods, they traded in desire. Caravans took 60 days to cross the desert to Gaza, each camel carrying sacks of tears from boswellia trees that only grew in distant Dhofar. But here's what made them geniuses: they didn't just move product, they controlled the narrative. By inventing stories about fire-breathing dragons guarding frankincense groves, they justified astronomical prices. Dive below the waters of today's Persian Gulf, and you'll find the ghostly outlines of their docks. Recent marine archaeology reveals sunken stone anchors and purling weights, proof of their dual economy. While frankincense made them rich, it was pearls that kept them resilient. Divers would hold their breath for 2 minutes, plunging 20 meters to pry oysters from seabeds, their ears stuffed with wax against the crushing pressure. The Jerhans perfected the art of nucleation, implanting tiny seed pearls into oysters to stimulate larger growth, a technique lost for centuries until Japanese innovators rediscovered it in the 1900s. Yet their downfall came not from the desert but from the sea. When Roman navigator Hippalus cracked the code of monsoon winds around 45 AD, ships began bypassing Jerha's overland routes. Imagine convoys suddenly veering south, their sails fat with wind, carrying frankincense directly from Oman to Egyptian ports. Jerha's middleman profits evaporated like morning dew on desert rocks. The final insult came when over-harvesting collapsed pearl beds. Core samples from mangrove sediments show a sudden spike in oyster shell fragments around 200 AD, the desperate scraping of depleted reefs. But walk through Bahrain's souks today and you'll catch echoes of their legacy. The The same honey-colored frankincense still burns in brass censers, and pearl divers' songs still ripple across the Gulf's waters. The Jehans remind us that even the mightiest trade empires are at the mercy of shifting winds, both metaphorical and real. Their story isn't just about loss, it's about adaptation. When one door closed, their descendants simply found new ones, proof that in the desert, survival isn't about resisting change, but riding its currents like a how catching the monsoon. Now let's journey south to the rugged highlands of Ethiopia, where the Kingdom of Axum once stood as a beacon of power and faith. Unlike the desert traders we've explored, Axum's greatness was carved into stone, literally. Picture towering obelisks, some reaching over 30 meters high, each one a testament to engineering prowess that rivaled Egypt's pyramids. These stelae weren't just monuments, they were billboards of authority, etched with intricate false doors and windows, symbolizing passages to the afterlife for Axum's elite. What set Axum apart was its strategic genius. Perched on the Red Sea trade routes, it became the African gateway for spices, ivory, and even exotic animals destined for Roman circuses. Their currency, inscribed with crosses and crescent moons, circulated from India to the Mediterranean, a rare example of an ancient African kingdom minting its own coins. But their most transformative move came in the 4th century, when King Ezana made a decision that would echo through history. He embraced Christianity, making Axum one of the world's earliest Christian states. Imagine the scene: priests from Alexandria baptizing royalty as pagan symbols were chiseled off stelae, replaced with crosses. Yet Axum's true marvel was its agricultural innovation. They terraced mountainsides with precise stone retaining walls, creating fertile steppes where none existed. Archaeologists have found reservoirs lined with waterproof mortar, some large enough to hold Olympic swimming pools worth of monsoon rains. But their brilliance contained the seeds of decline. Those very forests they cleared for farmland and construction, especially the sacred cedar used for stelae, never regrew. Soil samples reveal a grim timeline as centuries of intensive plowing stripped away fertile layers. By the 7th century, when Persian scholar al-Masudi visited, he described once bustling ports silted up, their harbors stranded kilometers inland due to erosion. The final blow came from an unexpected source: coffee. Yes, the very crop Ethiopia is famed for today may have hastened Axum's fall. Early cultivation required burning forest patches, accelerating deforestation. Pollen studies show a dramatic shift from tree to shrub vegetation around this period. As food yields dropped, Axum's rulers moved their capital uphill, abandoning the stone palaces that had defined their glory. But walk through modern-day Axum, and you'll find living threads of this lost civilization. Priests still guard what's believed to be the Ark of the Covenant in a humble chapel. Farmers still terrace hillsides much as their ancestors did. And those ancient coins turn up in village markets, now souvenirs rather than currency. Axum's legacy teaches us that even the mightiest kingdoms are bound to the land that sustains them. A lesson as relevant today as it was 1,500 years ago. Now let's turn our gaze to the sun-baked deserts of Nubia, where the enigmatic blemise carved out a reputation that both fascinated and terrified the ancient world. Unlike the grand stone monuments of Axum, the blemise left no towering ruins. Their legacy lies in the vivid accounts of Roman historians who painted them as fierce nomadic warriors, masters of the harsh eastern Sahara. Picture a people so adapted to desert life that classical writers like Pliny the Elder claimed they had no heads, their faces embedded in their chests, a bizarre myth likely born from their distinctive shield and spear fighting style, which made them appear headless in battle. These warriors weren't just desert phantoms, though. They were real and formidable. The blemise thrived in what's now southern Egypt and northern Sudan, controlling vital trade routes that connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean. Gold was their currency, and their influence stretched from the Nile Valley to the Red Sea. Roman emperors paid them tribute to keep caravan routes safe, while their raids on Egyptian cities became the stuff of legend. Imagine the scene: camel-mounted warriors descending like sandstorms on Roman outposts, vanishing back into the dunes before reinforcements could arrive. But what truly set the Blemmyes apart was their resilience. Where other cultures built cities, they mastered mobility, their knowledge of hidden oases and seasonal water holes making them nearly untouchable. Archaeologists have found traces of their campsites, simple stone circles and pottery shards, scattered across the desert, markers of a people who lived lightly on the land. Yet their strength also became their vulnerability. As the Roman Empire weakened, the Blemmyes found themselves squeezed between rising powers, from Christian Axum to the north to the expanding Kingdom of Nabatea to the south. The mystery of their disappearance is as compelling as their myths. Some scholars argue they were absorbed into Nubian kingdoms, their warriors becoming mercenaries for Christian rulers. Others point to climate shifts, the gradual drying of their already parched homeland as the final blow. A few tantalizing clues remain. 6th century church records mention Blemmy converts, suggesting some may have traded their swords for plows. Meanwhile, medieval Arab geographers wrote of headless giants lurking in the desert, a ghostly echo of a people who once ruled the sands. Today, the Blemmyes live on in unlikely places, their name borrowed for everything from desert-dwelling creatures in medieval maps to fantastical beasts in modern video games. But the real story is far richer. They remind us that survival in the desert isn't always about monuments or empires. Sometimes it's about adaptability, the ability to vanish into the landscape when needed, leaving only whispers in the wind. Shifting our focus from the nomadic Blemmyes to the cradle of urban civilization, let's journey to the sun-scorched plains of southern Iraq, where the Sumerians built the world's first cities in what was once a fertile marshland. Unlike the fleeting traces of desert nomads, Sumer's legacy is etched in clay tablets and the ruins of Ur and Uruk cities that rose like islands from drained wetlands, only to be swallowed by the very sands they fought to conquer. Imagine a landscape transformed. Around 5,000 years ago, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers nourished a lush delta, a maze of reeds and waterways that the Sumerians tamed with an engineering marvel, the first large-scale irrigation systems. They dug canals with mathematical precision, turning swamps into fields of barley and date palms. Uruk, with its towering ziggurats, became a metropolis of 30,000 people, a staggering number for the 3rd millennium before the Common Era. Their invention of writing, the cuneiform script, wasn't just for poetry or kings. It tracked grain shipments and labor shifts, the bureaucracy of survival in an unforgiving environment. Yet their brilliance carried the seeds of downfall. Every irrigation cycle left behind tiny amounts of salt, a residue that built up over centuries. At first, they adapted, switching from wheat to more salt-tolerant barley. But by 2,100 years before the Common Era, crop yields plummeted. Clay tablets lamented fields turning white as frost. Modern soil studies confirm it, the earth so saturated with salt that even barley struggled. The Sumerians, masters of water, found themselves poisoned by their own success. The collapse wasn't sudden. Kings ordered deeper canals to flush out the salt, desperate measures that only delayed the inevitable. As harvests failed, taxes dwindled and armies weakened. Neighboring Akkadians and Amorites, leaner and hungrier, carved up Sumer's weakened city-states. By 1800 years before the Common Era, Ur's great ziggurat stood half-buried in drifting sand, its priests long gone. What's haunting is how modern this ancient crisis feels. Today, satellite images show Iraq's farmlands still battling salt tides, a 3,000-year-old problem echoing in drained marshes and abandoned villages. The Sumerians remind us that even the greatest civilizations are experiments in balance between human ambition and the land's limits, between control and adaptation. Their ziggurats now rise like warnings from the desert, monuments to ingenuity and hubris alike. Now, let's travel across the globe to the blistering heat of the Sonoran Desert, where another civilization mastered the art of water in a land that seemed determined to deny it. The Hohokam, whose name means those who have vanished, left behind a network of irrigation canals so vast it rivals modern engineering. Picture this: over 1,000 miles of carefully dug channels, weaving through the desert like veins, feeding fields of maize, beans, and cotton where only cactus and scrub should have thrived. The Hohokam's canals were more than ditches, they were feats of precision. Using nothing but stone tools and woven baskets, they diverted water from the Salt and Gila rivers, calculating gradients with an eye for detail that still impresses hydrologists today. Some canals stretched over 20 miles with gates and diversions to control the flow. Their system was so efficient that parts of it were still in use when American settlers arrived centuries later. At its peak around 1100 years ago, their capital, Snaketown, buzzed with ball courts, platform mounds, and trade goods from as far away as Mexico. But water, the very lifeblood of their society, may have also been its undoing. As populations grew, so did competition for this precious resource. Archaeologists find clues in the ruins, canals abruptly abandoned, others hastily expanded. Some villages built defensive walls, not against invaders, but perhaps against neighbors fighting over water rights. Tree rings tell a grim story too, revealing decades-long droughts that would have strained even the Hohokam's ingenuity. Theories abound. Did upstream villages hoard water, sparking conflicts? Did silt-clogged canals become too costly to maintain? Or did a series of dry years fracture trust in the leaders who promised to keep the water flowing? By the 15th century, the Hohokam had dispersed, their great canals filling with sand. Some likely joined the Owadam tribes, whose oral traditions speak of ancestors who walked away when the land could no longer sustain them. What's chilling is the parallel to today. Arizona's cities now rely on the same rivers the Hohokam once tapped, pumping water through concrete canals. The Hohokam remind us that water disputes aren't just about scarcity, they're about how societies manage shared resources under pressure. Their ghostly canals, still visible from the air, are more than ruins. They're a blueprint and a warning. Now, let's journey from the sun-baked canals of Arizona to the windswept shores of Tasmania, where an entirely different story of survival unfolds. While most of our lost civilizations collapsed due to desertification or water scarcity, the Tasmanian Aboriginal people faced the opposite problem: too much water. Around 12,000 years ago, as glaciers melted and sea levels rose, the land bridge connecting Tasmania to mainland Australia vanished beneath the waves. What was once a peninsula became an island, isolating its inhabitants for millennia. Cut off from the mainland, Tasmania's environment grew harsher. The interior became drier, with open grasslands replacing dense forests. Yet the Aboriginal people not only adapted, they thrived. Without outside influence, their culture developed in ways found nowhere else on Earth. They crafted tools from kangaroo bone and kelp, wore sealskin cloaks, and maintained a seasonal migration cycle perfectly attuned to the island's resources. Most strikingly, they lost technologies their mainland cousins still used, like boomerangs and fishhooks, because Tasmania's unique ecology made them unnecessary. This isolation acted as a time capsule. When European explorers arrived in the 17th century, they encountered a way of life that had remained virtually unchanged for thousands of years. The Aboriginal people's fire stick, farming-controlled burns to manage vegetation, had shaped Tasmania's landscape into a mosaic of grasslands ideal for hunting. Their oral traditions preserved memories of the land bridge's flooding, passed down through hundreds of generations. Even their physical appearance showed signs of insular evolution, with some groups developing distinct traits after centuries of separation. But this very isolation also made them vulnerable. Unlike desert civilizations that faded gradually, Tasmania's Aboriginal communities faced abrupt devastation after European contact. Diseases, violence, and forced relocation nearly erased their cultures within decades. Today, their story serves as a poignant counterpoint to the other lost civilizations we've explored. While drought and resource wars undid societies like the Hohokam, the Tasmanians' undoing came from the outside world finding them, yet their legacy endures. Modern archaeological work reveals sophisticated stone tools hidden in now arid valleys, while descendants keep traditions alive through dance, art, and revived language. Tasmania reminds us that isolation can preserve, but also that no civilization, no matter how resilient, exists in a bubble. Whether it's rising seas or shifting trade routes, change always comes. The question is how we meet it. As we prepare to cross continents again, consider this: Tasmania's story isn't just about separation. It's about what happens when the walls between worlds suddenly fall. Next, we'll see how another civilization confronted that very challenge along the Nile's shifting banks. Shifting our gaze from the isolated shores of Tasmania, we now travel to the sun-scorched banks of the Nile, where the Kingdom of Kerma once stood as a beacon of power and innovation. This ancient Sudanese civilization, flourishing over 3,500 years ago, was far more than just a neighbor to Egypt. It was a rival, a trade partner, and ultimately a victim of the shifting tides of history. At its height, Kerma was a metropolis of towering mud-brick temples and sprawling suburbs, but its most striking feature were its circular tombs. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt, these massive, rounded structures housed not just kings but also sacrificed servants and livestock, a testament to the kingdom's wealth and spiritual depth. Archaeologists have uncovered tombs filled with ivory, gold, and intricate pottery, proof of Kerma's mastery of craftsmanship and its control over lucrative trade routes. The kingdom's prosperity was built on the Nile's generosity. Farmers cultivated wheat and barley in the fertile silt, while herders raised cattle so prized that Egyptian texts boasted of capturing them in raids. Kerma's artisans produced delicate faience jewelry, and its warriors wielded bows powerful enough to pierce armor. Yet this wasn't just a society of brute force. Their architects designed sophisticated water basins to manage floods, and their diplomats negotiated with empires from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. But Kerma's downfall came from the very river that nourished it. As Egypt's new kingdom expanded southward, pharaohs like Thutmose I saw Kerma as a threat. Military campaigns chipped away at its territory, but the deeper blow was environmental. The Nile's silt, the lifeblood of Kerma's agriculture, began to dwindle, possibly due to deforestation or shifts in the river's course. Crops failed and famine weakened the kingdom just as Egyptian armies pressed closer. By 1500 BCE, Kerma was absorbed into Egypt, its temples repurposed, its tombs looted. Yet its legacy didn't vanish. The Nubian kings who later ruled Egypt as the 25th dynasty drew inspiration from Kerma's grandeur, reviving its art and architecture. Today, the ruins whisper of a civilization that refused to be forgotten, a reminder that even the mightiest empires are shaped by both the sword and the soil. As we leave the Nile's whispering sands, let's ponder this: Kerma's story isn't just about conquest. It's about how a river can build a kingdom, and how, when that river changes, even the strongest walls can crumble. Next, we'll venture into China's Taklamakan Desert, where another civilization faced a far more insidious enemy, the dunes themselves. Now, we journey from the Nile's fading echoes to the heart of Asia's Taklamakan Desert, where the enigmatic Loulan kingdom once thrived, a civilization swallowed by the sands, leaving behind whispers of a people far from home. Nestled in China's Tarim Basin, Loulan was no ordinary oasis. Its ruins and the mummies preserved within them tell a story that still puzzles historians. A population with striking Caucasian features, their origins traced not to East Asia but to the distant steppes of Europe. The discovery of the Loulan mummies was a revelation. Buried beneath the dunes, their auburn hair, high cheekbones, and woven wool garments defied expectations. Genetic testing revealed ties to ancient cultures of the Black Sea region, suggesting these settlers migrated thousands of miles across unforgiving terrain, perhaps following the promise of water or trade. Their very presence rewrites the map of early human movement, proving the Tarim Basin was a crossroads long before the Silk Road's glory days. Loulan's cities were marvels of adaptation. Built around oases fed by mountain runoff, they relied on intricate networks of canals to irrigate crops of millet and wheat. Homes were constructed with poplar wood, their walls reinforced against the desert's wrath. Archaeologists have unearthed wooden tablets inscribed in Kharosthi script, evidence of a bureaucracy that managed trade in jade, spices, and glass between China and the West. Yet Loulan's greatest treasure was its water. In a land where rivers vanish underground, controlling these lifelines meant survival, but the dunes held a grudge. As climate shifts dried up the oases, the Tarim Basin's rivers changed course, leaving Loulan's canals to choke on dust. Sandstorms buried streets whole, and the once bustling markets fell silent. By 400 CE, the kingdom was abandoned, its people likely scattering to greener valleys. The mummies, though, remained perfectly preserved by the arid air, their lips still parted as if mid-sentence, their stories frozen in time. What lingers most is the mystery of their disappearance. Was it sudden, a single catastrophic drought, or slow, as each generation watched the water recede? The sands offer no easy answers, but Loulan's legacy endures in the DNA of modern Icars and in the haunting beauty of its ruins, a reminder that even the hardiest civilizations are no match for a shifting earth. As we brush the dust from this forgotten chapter, let's turn next to a kingdom whose downfall was written in water and in stone. Yemen's Marib Dam and the Sabaean civilization it sustained await. Leaving the windswept ruins of Loulan behind, we now venture into the realm of myth and towering stone, where the legends of the Queen of Sheba collide with the harsh realities of desert survival. Welcome to Marib, the heart of Yemen's ancient Sabaean civilization, a kingdom whose wealth and power were as legendary as its catastrophic fall. The Sabaeans were masters of the impossible. In the blistering sands of southern Arabia, they built not just a city, but an empire fueled by frankincense and audacity. Marib's greatest marvel, the Great Dam, a staggering feat of engineering that turned the desert into a breadbasket for nearly 1,000 years. Stretching nearly 2,000 feet across a rocky gorge, this structure wasn't mere masonry. It was a covenant between civilization and nature. Channels diverted seasonal floods into a labyrinth of terraced fields, supporting a population of 50,000 in a land where rain was as rare as gold. But the Sabaeans weren't just farmers. They were traders, diplomats, and storytellers. Their capital, Marib, thrived as the hub of the frankincense route, where caravans laden with the sacred resin wound their way to Egypt, Persia, and beyond. The Bible and Quran alike whisper of their most famous ruler, the Queen of Sheba, whose visit to King Solomon may have been less about romance and more about securing trade alliances. Archaeologists have uncovered palaces adorned with intricate alabaster carvings and inscriptions praising the moon god Olmaka, proof of a society both devout and dazzlingly sophisticated. Yet the dam, their lifeline, became their undoing. Centuries of silt buildup choked its sluice gates, and repairs grew costlier as the kingdom's wealth dwindled. Then, around 570 CE, catastrophe struck. Historical accounts describe a flood so violent it breached the dam's defenses, unleashing a torrent that swept away fields, homes, and the very foundation of Sabaean power. But was it truly a single disaster? Recent studies point to a slower killer, desertification. Tree rings and sediment cores reveal a grim pattern: dwindling rains, overgrazed land, and soil erosion that left the dam's watershed barren. By the time the final flood came, the Sabaeans were already a people on the brink. What followed was a scattering, a diaspora of tribes adapting to a harsher world. Some migrated north, their irrigation knowledge echoing in the Khanats of Persia. Others clung to the highlands, their descendants becoming the coffee farmers of modern Yemen. But Marib itself, it faded into a ghostly ruin, its dam a skeletal reminder of humanity's fragile pact with the desert. As we trace the cracks in this ancient masonry, let's turn next to a civilization that turned migration into an art form. The Toltec Chichimca, whose restless footsteps redrew the maps of Mexico's arid north. Crossing continents now from Yemen's fallen dams to the shifting sands of northern Mexico, we find a civilization that turned upheaval into opportunity. The Toltec Chichimca migrations weren't just a retreat from collapse, they were a reinvention. When their capital, Chala, crumbled in the 12th century, these resourceful peoples didn't vanish. Instead, they mastered the art of survival in some of North America's most unforgiving deserts, leaving behind clues that blur the line between history and legend. The Toltecs were once the architects of an empire, their city of Chala brimming with towering pyramids and obsidian workshops, but drought, famine, and internal strife shattered their dominion. What happened next is where myth and archaeology diverge. Aztec chronicles later painted the Toltecs as godlike figures, claiming their ruler Quetzalcoatl fled eastward on a raft of serpents, promising to return. But the truth, scratched into the desert rocks and buried in scattered ruins, tells a grittier tale. Groups we now call the Chichimca, a catch-all term for nomadic tribes of northern Mexico, absorbed Toltec refugees, blending their urban knowledge with desert-hardened resilience. Their migration routes read like a map of desperation and ingenuity. Through the Chihuahuan and Sonoran deserts they moved, following faint trails of seasonal springs and edible plants. Archaeologists have found their way stations, circular pit houses sunk into the earth for insulation, surrounded by grinding stones for mesquite pods and agave hearts. These weren't aimless wanderers, they carried Toltec metallurgy skills, crafting copper bells that became trade currency across the southwest. At La Quemada in Zacatecas, a fortress-like complex hints at how they adapted Toltec military tactics, using cliffside terraces and narrow causeways to defend against rival groups. Yet the desert demanded compromises. Where Chala had sprawling plazas, their new settlements clung to canyon walls. Their art shifted from elaborate stone carvings to portable painted hides, easier to carry during sudden moves. Even their gods evolved. The feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl merged with local deities, becoming a hybrid figure of wind and rain desperately needed in parched lands. The greatest testament to their resilience, their legacy in living cultures. When the Spanish arrived centuries later, they encountered descendants of these migrations, the Zacatecos and Guachachals, who still used Toltec-inspired irrigation canals to farm arid valleys. Modern linguistic studies even trace Nahuatl words for water management back to Toltec roots. So was the Chichimca era a dark age or a rebirth? The ruins whisper a third option, a civilization that traded stone monuments for survival wisdom, proving that sometimes the greatest monuments aren't buildings, they're stories carved into the land itself. And speaking of stories written in sand, our next stop reveals how another culture turned desert winds into an artistic canvas, the Fremont people and their enigmatic rock galleries. Now we journey from the sun-baked trails of Mexico to the wind-carved edges of Pakistan's deserts, where an ancient civilization turned barren landscapes into spiritual havens. The Gandhara region, cradled between the Hindu Kush Mountains and the Indus River, was once a dazzling crossroads of culture and commerce. Here, Buddhist monks didn't just survive the arid fringes, they thrived, carving monasteries into cliffs and trading wisdom along the Silk Road. But their story holds a stark warning about how easily water can both create and erase empires. Gandhara's golden age began around the 2nd century BCE, when Greek, Persian, and Indian influences collided under the rule of the Kushan Empire. Picture this, towering stupas adorned with Hellenistic sculptures of the Buddha, their draped robes and serene faces blending Greek artistry with Eastern spirituality. Monasteries like Taktaibahai clung to rocky outcrops, their tiered courtyards and meditation cells offering refuge to scholars and pilgrims. The monks harnessed desert ingenuity, channeling mountain runoff through intricate networks of terracotta pipes to nourish gardens and bathhouses. Even the arid soil became a canvas. Their signature green schist stone, quarried locally, was carved into intricate reliefs depicting the Buddha's life, each panel a masterpiece surviving centuries of scorching winds. But Gandhara's lifeline was the Silk Road, and with it the rivers that made the desert bloom. The Kabul and Swat rivers weren't just water sources, they were liquid highways. Merchant caravans carrying Chinese silk and Roman glass followed their banks, while monks exchanged sutras in dozens of languages. Taxila, Gandhara's intellectual heart, became a university city where philosophy and astronomy flourished alongside river-fed orchards. Then the rivers betrayed them. Satellite imagery and sediment cores reveal a slow-motion disaster. Around the 5th century CE, tectonic shifts began diverting the Kabul River's tributaries, starving Gandhara's canals. Monsoon patterns grew erratic, and the once reliable springs dried up. Abandonment wasn't sudden, it was a suffocating squeeze. Monks plastered over murals to protect them from dust storms, their final act of devotion. Farmers watched as wheat fields reverted to scrubland, and the Silk Road traffic inched south toward more reliable oases. Today, Gandhara's ruins whisper of adaptation's limits. At Jamal Garhai, the skeleton of a monastery stands with prayer halls open to the sky, their painted Buddhas long since scoured away by sand-laden winds. Yet even in retreat, Gandhara left fingerprints across Asia. Its Greco-Buddhist art style traveled along monk migration routes, shaping statues from Afghanistan to Japan. And those terracotta pipes, modern Pakistani villages still use their ancient blueprints to capture fleeting rainwater. The lesson in these crumbling stones isn't just about rivers changing course, it's about civilizations learning to bend without breaking. And speaking of bending, our next chapter reveals how another desert culture turned survival into an art form, quite literally, with cliffs as their canvas. Now, let's shift our gaze from the cliffside monasteries of Gandhara to the vast, windswept plains of Mauritania, where an entirely different kind of desert civilization left behind a mystery carved in stone. The Tichit-Walata region, a rugged stretch of West Africa's Sahara, holds the remnants of some of the continent's oldest stone-walled settlement cities that thrived for over 1,000 years before vanishing into silence. Imagine a landscape where every rock tells a story. Around 2,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Sonic people began stacking local sandstone into intricate walls, transforming barren outcrops into bustling urban centers. These weren't simple huts. Tichit and its sister cities like Walata featured multi-room compounds, granaries raised on stilts to deter pests, and streets laid out in precise grids. Archaeologists have mapped over 400 of these settlements, some housing thousands of residents. What's astonishing is their endurance. While empires like Rome rose and fell, Tichit stone cities persisted, adapting to the Sahara's creeping aridity through ingenious water conservation. They dug deep wells lined with stone, channeled seasonal floods into terraced gardens, and stored grain in labyrinthine storerooms that kept harvests edible for years. But here's the puzzle. By the 14th century, these resilient communities emptied out almost overnight. Unlike Gandhara's slow decline, Tichit's abandonment feels abrupt. Walk through the ruins today and you'll find grinding stones left mid-meal, jewelry scattered in courtyards, and skeletal remains of cattle herds. So what happened? Clues point to a perfect storm of crises. Tree ring data shows a catastrophic drought around 1300 CE, shriveling the already precarious grasslands. Then came the camels. Arab traders introduced these desert ships, revolutionizing trans-Saharan trade, but their herds overgrazed the region's last patches of vegetation. Meanwhile, gold-rich empires like Ghana and Mali lured away Tichit's merchants, leaving the stone cities economically stranded. But the final blow might have been social. Excavations reveal layers of ash in the granaries, suggesting fires set intentionally. Did a starving population turn on its leaders, or did invaders torch the stores to cripple resistance? Yet Tichet's legacy endures. Their stone building techniques spread south, influencing later cities like Timbuktu. And in a twist of irony, modern nomads still use the ancient wells, the same ones that once sustained a civilization the desert couldn't break. As we piece together these fragments of the past, another story awaits, one where an empire's thirst for gold reshaped an entire region's fate. Let's peel back another layer of Sahara's hidden history, where the Garamantes, Libya's ancient desert masters, turned the sands into a green empire with an unsettling secret. Beneath their sun-baked cities lay a web of tunnels so vast they rivaled Rome's aqueducts. But these engineering marvels came at a dark cost, the labor of thousands of Roman prisoners. Picture this: around the 1st century, the Garamantes, a Berber kingdom feared for their chariot raids, began capturing Roman soldiers and settlers from coastal outposts. These prisoners weren't just thrown into dungeons, they became the backbone of an underground revolution. The Garamantes forced them to dig fagaras, horizontal tunnels that tapped into ancient groundwater, sometimes stretching over 4 miles through solid rock. With simple iron tools, these enslaved crews carved channels just tall enough to crawl through, shoring up walls with palm wood to prevent cave-ins. The result? A sprawling irrigation network that fed orchards and fields in the heart of the desert, turning places like Jerma, their capital, into an oasis of date palms and vineyards. But here's where the story twists. Historians long assumed the Garamantes faded due to climate change as the Sahara dried up, yet recent excavations tell a grimmer tale. At a fagara site called Taghurt, archaeologists found shackles still clamped around skeletal remains, evidence of a violent end. Even more telling, some tunnels show signs of deliberate collapse, as if sabotaged from within. Could a slave revolt have accelerated the kingdom's fall? Consider the timeline. By the 4th century, Rome's power was waning, and the Garamantes' raids yielded fewer captives. Maintenance of the fagaras, already strained by dropping water tables, would have required constant labor. Add to this the discovery of burned granaries near Jerma, coinciding with a period when Roman accounts mention uprisings in the desert. While no single event doomed the Garamantes, the unraveling of their slave-dependent economy likely played a pivotal role, yet their ingenuity outlived them. Today, Tuareg nomads still use modified fagaras, and satellite imagery reveals over 600 abandoned tunnels, ghostly fingerprints of an empire that dared to green the desert but paid the price in blood. As the desert sands whisper these buried secrets, another civilization beckons, one whose wealth literally dripped from trees. Now let's turn our gaze toward the crimson cliffs of Arabia, where the Nabateans, architects of Petra, wrote a different kind of desert survival story. While their rock-cut city dazzles modern tourists, their true genius lay in something far less visible, a spiderweb of hidden trade routes that snaked through the most unforgiving landscapes. Recent satellite surveys and drone mapping have unearthed a network of caravanserais, rest stops for camel trains buried under centuries of sand. These weren't just pit stops. At sites like Humaima in southern Jordan, archaeologists found stone troughs still stained with resin from frankincense sacks, and ledger tablets detailing taxes on everything from Indian spices to Chinese silks. The Nabateans didn't just endure the desert, they weaponized its harshness. By routing caravans through secret passes like the Wadi Rum, they avoided rival taxes and bandits, creating a trade monopoly so lucrative even Rome envied it. Here's where the plot thickens. For 300 years, the Nabateans played empires against each other, paying nominal homage to Rome while quietly controlling the frankincense trade. Their undoing came not from climate or revolt, but from a Roman emperor's greed. In 106 AD, Trajan annexed their kingdom, labeling it Arabia Patria, a colonial rebrand that masked a resource grab. Roman engineers immediately paved over Nabatean dirt tracks with straight, militarized highways, plastering them with mile markers carved with eagles. The consequences were swift. Freed from Nabatean middlemen, Palmyra and other cities siphoned off trade. Petra's water fees, once paid by every passing caravan, dried up. Within 2 generations, the city's population halved, but the cruelest twist, Rome's new roads followed Nabatean blueprints so precisely, modern historians can trace the original routes by where Roman milestones stand ghosts of a stolen innovation. Yet in the silence of abandoned caravanserais, echoes remain. In Saudi Arabia's Al-Ula, archaeologists recently found Nabatean graffiti, a merchant's plea to the god Dashara scratched onto a sandstone wall, begging protection for a lost caravan. It's a poignant reminder that empires may fall, but the desert never forgets. And speaking of forgotten empires, prepare to meet a civilization whose wealth didn't come from trade routes or tunnels, but from trees that wept gold. Now let's journey east to the Indus Valley, where one of history's most advanced civilizations faced a slow-motion catastrophe. While Petra's downfall came from imperial ambition, the Harappans, masters of urban planning in what's now Pakistan and India, met their match in the skies above them. Sediment cores drilled from the Arabian seafloor tell a chilling story. Layers of fossilized plankton and mineral deposits reveal that around 4,200 years ago, the monsoon rains, lifeblood of this river-fed civilization, began flickering like a dying lamp. At its peak, the Indus Valley boasted cities like Mohenjo-Daro with grid-patterned streets and sophisticated drainage systems. But when archaeologists examine the final occupation layers, they find eerie clues. In Dolavira, a desert outpost in modern Gujarat, reservoirs designed to hold monsoon runoff sit empty, their baked floors cracked like dried mudflats. Grain storage jars from this period contain not wheat or barley but sand. The big debate among scholars whether this was a swift collapse or a staggered retreat. Some point to geological evidence of a mega drought around 2100 BC, a climate event so severe it's detected as far away as Egypt's Nile records. Others argue the Harappans adapted for centuries, with satellite imagery showing settlers migrating east toward the Ganges basin, where rains still fell. At the abandoned city of Kalibangan, we see this duality in action. The lower town was orderly, abandoned tools neatly stacked, doors sealed, while the citadel shows signs of frantic last efforts, with wells dug deeper into collapsing aquifers. Here's what makes the Indus Valley's fate uniquely haunting. Unlike Petra or Rome, there's no invading army or trade collapse to blame. Just a civilization that planned for floods, engineered sewer systems rivaling modern cities, yet couldn't outwit the atmosphere. The ultimate irony, their river, the Gaga Hakra, now flows only in monsoon season, a ghost of the waterway that once sustained 500,000 people. And when modern farmers in this region face failed rains, they're unknowingly replaying a drama written 4 millennia ago. But if the Harappans teach us anything, it's that collapse isn't always an ending. Genetic studies show their descendants likely merged with incoming Indo-Aryan groups, meaning their legacy might flow in the veins of over 600 million South Asians today. That's the thing about deserts, they bury cities but not stories. And speaking of stories, our next civilization didn't just adapt to arid lands, they built an empire where no one thought possible, turning sand into gold with nothing but camels and determination. Now let's venture into the windswept plains of Central Asia, where the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex, or the Oxus civilization, carved out a thriving network of fortified cities in what's now Turkmenistan and Afghanistan. Picture this, towering mud brick walls rising from the desert, protecting settlements filled with artisans crafting intricate seals and jewelry. This culture, flourishing between 2300 and 1700 BC, was a crossroads of innovation where Mesopotamian, Indus Valley, and Eurasian steppe influences collided. What set the Oxus people apart? Their mastery of survival in arid lands. At sites like Garamantes de Petra, archaeologists have uncovered vast complexes with temples, workshops, and even early forms of air conditioning wind catchers funneling cool breezes into homes. But their most striking feature, a web of fortified outposts along the Amu Darya River, known in antiquity as the Oxus. These strongholds guarded trade routes carrying lapis lazuli from Afghanistan to Egypt and tin essential for bronze making across the ancient world. Yet around 1800 BC, something went terribly wrong. The Amu Darya, their lifeline, began shifting its course. Satellite imagery reveals ancient river channels now buried under the Karakum Desert, telling a story of creeping drought. At the city of Togalok, wells were dug deeper, then abandoned. Grain stores show signs of sudden depletion, as if harvests failed overnight. Some scholars argue tectonic activity may have diverted the river, while others point to climate change drying up tributaries. The most haunting clue lies in their final acts. At Garamantes de Petra, residents sealed doorways with bricks before leaving, as if hoping to return, but they never did. Unlike the Harappans, who migrated east, the Oxus people fragmented, some blending with nomadic groups, others vanishing entirely. Their legacy, a cautionary tale about depending on a single river in an unforgiving landscape. Today, the Amu Darya still feeds Uzbekistan's cotton fields, but its waters are dwindling thanks to Soviet-era irrigation projects. History, it seems, has a way of circling back. And speaking of rivers rewriting destinies, our next civilization faced a similar crisis when their sacred waters turned against them, burying an empire under sand. Shifting our gaze from the river-dependent Oxus to the high deserts of North America, we encounter the enigmatic Fremont culture, a civilization that thrived in what is now Utah between 600 and 1300 AD. Unlike their better-known neighbors, the Anasazi, who built towering cliff dwellings, the Fremont people carved out a unique identity in the harsh Great Basin. Picture vast fields of maize and squash stretching across arid valleys, irrigated by ingenious systems of ditches and reservoirs, a testament to their adaptability in a land of extremes. What makes the Fremont so fascinating? Their ability to balance farming with foraging, creating a lifestyle distinct from the purely agricultural Anasazi. While both cultures grew maize, the Fremont relied more heavily on wild plants and game, leaving behind pit houses lined with woven mats and granaries tucked into rocky alcoves. But their most enduring legacy, striking rock art panels depicting trapezoidal human figures with elaborate headdresses, often accompanied by bighorn sheep or spirals. These cryptic designs, pecked into canyon walls, suggest a rich spiritual life intertwined with the desert landscape. The mystery deepens when we examine their disappearance. By 1300 AD, Fremont villages lay abandoned, their fields reclaimed by sagebrush. Unlike the Anasazi, who migrated southward, the Fremont seemed to have vanished without a clear exodus. Some archaeologists propose they were absorbed by the Numic-speaking tribes, ancestors of the modern Ute and Paiute, who arrived in the region around this time. Evidence lies in cultural continuity, similar basketry techniques, and the persistence of rock art motifs. Yet other scholars argue for a more dramatic end, pointing to skeletal remains with signs of malnutrition and violence during a period of prolonged drought. One clue emerges from their final settlements. At the Range Creek Canyon site, researchers found granaries still filled with maize, as if the inhabitants planned to return after a seasonal hunt. But they never did. Climate data reveals the medieval warm period peaked around 1200 AD, drying up already scarce water sources. Unlike the Oxus or Anasazi, the Fremont left no grand ruins, just whispers in the rock and the silent endurance of their drought-resistant crops, still found growing wild centuries later. Their story challenges our assumptions about collapse. Rather than vanishing, the Fremont may have simply adapted once more, shedding settled life to join mobile hunter-gatherer bands. As we move forward, another desert civilization faced a far more abrupt fate, its cities swallowed by a single night's disaster. Now let's journey deeper into the Sahara's shifting sands, where the Kingdom of Yam remains one of Egyptology's most tantalizing puzzles. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions speak of a wealthy realm lying far to the southwest beyond the dunes of Nubia, a land teeming with exotic goods like incense, ebony, and panther skins. But was Yam a real political power, a loose network of nomadic tribes, or merely a romanticized trading post embellished by pharaonic scribes? The debate hinges on two extraordinary expeditions recorded in the tomb of Harkhaf, a governor who ventured into Yam during the 6th dynasty around 2200 BC. Harkhaf's carvings boast of a 7-month caravan trek through the western desert, returning with 300 donkeys laden with treasures. Most intriguing, his mention of a dancing pygmy gifted by Yam's ruler, sparking theories about Central African connections. Modern archaeologists have scoured the Sahara's wadis for Yam's heartland, focusing on the remote Gilf Kebir plateau near Libya's border. Here, cave paintings depict chariots and cattle herds matching Egyptian descriptions, while pottery fragments suggest trade links. Yet no centralized capital has emerged, just scattered wells and seasonal camps. This fuels the Confederation theory that Yam wasn't a single kingdom but an alliance of desert clans controlling trade routes between the Nile and sub-Saharan Africa. Contrast this with the fictional partner school of thought. Some scholars argue Yam was Egypt's version of El Dorado, a distant, semi-mythical land whose scarcity enhanced its prestige. They point to inconsistencies in Egyptian accounts. Yam's location shifts between inscriptions, sometimes placing it near the Fifth Cataract, other times deep in the Chad Basin. The dancing pygmy story mirrors later Greco-Roman tales of fantastical African creatures, raising questions about artistic license. Even Harkhaf's records may have exaggerated his exploits to impress Pharaoh Pepi II, who famously gushed over the pygmy in a childhood letter still preserved on his tomb walls. The climate adds another layer. Around 2200 BC, the Sahara was still greening from its last humid period. Yam's prosperity may have relied on transient grasslands that vanished as desertification accelerated, leaving no monumental ruins. Recent satellite imagery reveals fossilized river channels near Gilf Kebir, hinting at lost oases that could have sustained caravans. Perhaps Yam's true legacy lies not in bricks or borders, but in its role as a cultural bridge, a fleeting crossroads where Egyptian beads met sub-Saharan ivory, mediated by nomadic traders who left no written records. As the sands continue to erase traces of this enigmatic realm, Yam challenges us to rethink what constitutes a civilization in hyper-arid lands. Without pyramids or palaces, its influence endured through stories etched in Nile Valley tombs, proof that even the most ephemeral desert kingdoms could leave indelible marks on history. Next, we'll encounter a civilization whose astronomical knowledge was literally written in the stars. While the Kingdom of Yam fades into the Saharan mists, let's turn our gaze skyward to the Thamudic people of Arabia, whose celestial wisdom was carved into desert cliffs. These pre-Islamic nomads left behind more than just rock inscriptions. They embedded their understanding of the cosmos in petroglyphs that align with solstices, equinoxes, and star clusters. Scattered across Saudi Arabia's volcanic plains, these ancient carvings reveal a civilization deeply attuned to the rhythms of the heavens. One remarkable site, Jabal al-Lawz near Tabuk, features boulders etched with precise star maps. Researchers have identified depictions of Orion's belt and the Pleiades, constellations critical to seasonal navigation in Arabia's harsh deserts. Even more striking are the raid figures, human-like forms with radiating headdresses that some scholars interpret as celestial deities or records of supernova. The Thamud may have used these alignments as a calendar, timing migrations and water collection with celestial events. At Al-Nasla, a bisected rock formation, A petroglyph of a camel aligns perfectly with the winter solstice sunrise, casting shadows that split the figure, a possible ritual marker for the year's shortest day. But why did this star-literate society vanish? The Quran references their downfall as divine punishment for arrogance, yet geological clues suggest environmental catastrophe. Around 300 AD, a massive drought gripped Arabia, evidenced by sediment cores from ancient lakes. Some researchers propose a cosmic trigger, a meteor or comet recorded in Chinese annals as a guest star that blazed for months in 531 AD. Could this event have disrupted climate patterns, drying up the Thamud's precious wells? Alternatively, their expertise may have bred vulnerability. By concentrating settlements near astronomically significant oases, the Thamud became dependent on predictable celestial cycles. When a prolonged solar minimum like the late antique Little Ice Age altered rainfall patterns, their water management systems failed. Modern Bedouins still recount oral traditions of the Thamud's star priests who misread omens, leading their people into barren land. The Thamud's legacy lingers in unexpected ways. Their star symbols influenced early Islamic astronomy, and their solstice markers may have guided later Nabatean traders. As satellites now detect lost Thamudic wells beneath Saudi dunes, we're reminded that their greatest invention wasn't stone carvings, it was the ability to turn the desert's emptiness into a canvas for cosmic stories. Next, we'll unearth how another civilization's wealth literally sank into the sands. But as we shift from the celestial wisdom of the Thamud to the earthbound riches of Ubar, prepare to uncover a city where fortunes were literally built on sand and lost beneath it. Known as the Atlantis of the Sands, Ubar was the beating heart of the ancient frankincense trade, a commodity so valuable it was worth its weight in gold. Satellite imagery has revealed a web of caravan routes stretching over 1,000 miles, from Oman's Dhofar region to the markets of Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. These ghostly tracks, etched into the desert by countless camel trains, tell the story of a trade so vast it sustained kings and temples. Frankincense resin, harvested from the scraggly boswellia trees of southern Arabia, was the lifeblood of Ubar. The city's merchants controlled the entire supply chain, from the steamy coastal groves where the trees were slashed to bleed their fragrant sap, to the sun-baked warehouses where the resin hardened into golden tears. A single camel load around 300 pounds could fetch the equivalent of a Roman soldier's yearly salary. At its peak, Ubar may have exported over 3,000 tons annually, feeding demand for temple incense, medicinal bombs, and elite burial rituals across the ancient world. Recent excavations at Shisar in Oman's empty quarter have uncovered Ubar's likely remains, a massive octagonal fortress with towers collapsing inward as if swallowed by the earth. Geological surveys confirm the catastrophe. The city sat atop a limestone cavern system weakened by centuries of water extraction from underground channels called qanats. When a major earthquake struck around 300 AD, the ground literally opened up, dragging palaces and warehouses into a subterranean void. Bedouin legends speak of a city of pillars vanishing overnight, its people punished for greed. But Ubar's legacy transcends its dramatic end. The same satellite maps that pinpoint its ruins also reveal how its trade networks shaped civilizations. Frankincense routes became cultural arteries, carrying not just goods but ideas, alphabets, deities, and architectural styles flowed along these trails. Even today, the descendants of Ubar's merchants, the Al-Kathiri tribe, still harvest frankincense using methods unchanged for millennia. As we explore next, another desert civilization would rise from trade only to crumble when the very ground beneath it rebelled. As we leave behind the sunken riches of Ubar, let's journey now to the high desert of the American Southwest, where an entirely different kind of civilization left its mark, not in gold or incense, but in stone and sacred geometry. The ancestral Pueblones of Chaco Canyon engineered a network of roads so precise they still baffle archaeologists today. These weren't just practical thoroughfares, they were ceremonial pathways, arteries of a spiritual landscape. Stretching over 180 miles in perfectly straight lines, the roads cut across mesas and canyons with an almost supernatural disregard for terrain. Some researchers believe these paths were physical manifestations of the Puebloans' cosmic beliefs, connecting great houses to sacred mountains and celestial events. At the heart of this network stood Pueblo Bonito, a colossal 4-story structure with over 600 rooms, its walls aligned to the solstices. But what's truly remarkable is how little evidence there is of everyday use. Few cooking hearths, minimal trash middens. This wasn't a city in the conventional sense. Instead, it appears Chaco was a pilgrimage center, a place where scattered communities would gather for ceremonies timed to astronomical cycles. The roads, often 30 feet wide and bordered by low stone walls, seem designed for processions rather than trade. Some lead to isolated shrines or herraduras, horseshoe-shaped mounds where offerings were left. Yet, for all its grandeur, Chaco's collapse was as dramatic as its rise. Tree ring data reveals a devastating 50-year drought beginning around 1130 AD, coinciding with the canyon's abandonment. But was it just the lack of rain that doomed this civilization? Skeletons from the period show signs of malnutrition and even violence, a spiritual crisis etched in bone. Some archaeologists argue that when the rains failed, so did the social contract. The great houses, once symbols of communal effort, may have become targets of resentment as food stores dwindled. Others point to evidence of ritual cannibalism, suggesting extreme desperation or the breakdown of religious authority. What makes Chaco's story particularly haunting is the resilience of its descendants. The modern Pueblo peoples, including the Hopi and Zuni, still recount migration stories that mirror Chaco's archaeological record. Their kivas, subterranean ceremonial chambers, are direct descendants of those in the canyon. Even the roads find echoes in today's pilgrimage trails to sacred sites like Zuni's Corn Mountain. This continuity suggests that while Chaco's physical structures were abandoned, its spiritual legacy never truly vanished. As we'll see next, another desert civilization would face a similar reckoning, not with drought this time, but with the very water that once sustained it. Now, shifting our focus from the drought-stricken cliffs of Chaco Canyon, let's descend to the arid coast of ancient Peru, where the Moche civilization turned to the heavens and to blood to plead for survival. Unlike the ancestral Puebloans, the Moche didn't just face a lack of rain. Their enemy was far more unpredictable, the capricious wrath of El Niño, a climate phenomenon that could bring either paralyzing drought or catastrophic floods. Archaeological evidence paints a chilling picture of how the Moche responded. At sites like the Pyramid of the Moon and Huaca de la Luna, excavations have uncovered mass graves of sacrificial victims, men in their prime, their bones showing signs of brutal execution. Their rib cages splay open, hinting at heart extraction rituals, but what's most revealing is the timing. These sacrifices spike during periods when sediment cores show intense El Niño activity. It seems the Moche, master hydrologist who built intricate canal networks to farm the desert, saw these climate disasters as divine retribution, their solution. Offering the ultimate gift to their gods, human life, forensic anthropology adds another layer to this grim story. The skeletons don't just show ritual violence, they bear markers of chronic stress. Enamel defects in teeth reveal childhood malnutrition, while healed fractures suggest lives of hard labor. Some victims display telltale Harshest lines in their bones, indicating cycles of starvation and recovery. These weren't prisoners of war, as once theorized, but likely members of the Moche's own society, chosen as offerings during crises. The artifacts found with these remains tell a parallel tale. Ceramic vessels depict a deity now called the Decapitator, a half-human, half-jaguar figure holding a sacrificial knife, locked in battle with nature's forces. Other pots show torrential rains drowning villages, their artists capturing the very floods El Niño would have unleashed. This wasn't just art, it was a desperate dialogue with the supernatural. Yet for all their gruesome fervor, the Moche's rituals may have hastened their downfall. As El Niño events grew more frequent around 600 AD, the sacrifices escalated, but so did internal unrest. Burials from this late period show increasing numbers of women and children among the victims, suggesting societal breakdown. By the time sand dunes began swallowing their irrigation canals, the Moche's spiritual contract had already shattered. What lingers most hauntingly is the modern parallel. Today's Peruvian fishermen still call destructive warm currents El Niño, the Christ child, just as their Moche ancestors might have. In both eras, the desert's fragility forced humans to confront forces beyond their control. Next, we'll see how another civilization gambled its survival on a single, monumental structure, a gamble that would end beneath shifting sands. Leaving behind the blood-stained pyramids of the Moche, we journey across the Atlantic to West Africa's arid plains, where the Tichit culture pioneered an agricultural revolution under the scorching sun. While ancient Peru grappled with El Niño's chaos, these Saharan innovators faced a different adversary, the unrelenting dryness of the desert. Their weapon of choice wasn't sacrificial blades, but something far more sustainable: millet. Archaeobotanists working in Mauritania's Dihar-Tichit region have uncovered the oldest evidence of domesticated pearl millet in Africa, dating back over 3,500 years. What makes this discovery extraordinary isn't just its age, but the ingenuity behind it. The Tichit people didn't merely gather wild grains. They selectively bred strains that could thrive in near-desert conditions, creating a crop that required minimal water. Excavations reveal stone-lined granaries built into cliff faces, some capable of holding over 600 kilograms of grain, a testament to agricultural surplus in one of Earth's harshest environments. But how did they achieve this? The answer lies in their intricate land management. Satellite imagery shows vast, circular stone walls stretching across the landscape, not for defense but as zai pits. These structures trapped scarce rainwater and redirected it to crops while the stones reduced evaporation. It's an early example of permaculture, centuries before the term existed. Yet this millet revolution may have met a gruesome end. Among the cracked grinding stones and storage vessels, researchers found something unsettling: layers of sediment packed with grasshopper mandibles far thicker than natural deposits. Could swarms of locusts, a phenomenon still dreaded by Sahel farmers today, have ravaged their hard-won harvests? Contemporary accounts from Egyptian traders describe skies black with winged devils in neighboring regions during this period. The Tichit story takes a darker turn in their final century. At sites like Dakit el Atraus, archaeologists note a sudden shift from granaries to defensive walls. Skeletons show signs of blunt force trauma, and millet residues in cooking pots are replaced by wild grasses, a desperate fallback when crops failed. Whether from locust plagues, soil exhaustion, or conflicts over dwindling resources, this agricultural pioneer's decline warns us how tightly survival hangs by a thread in arid lands. What lingers is their legacy. That same drought-resistant millet now feeds millions across the Sahel, its genetic roots tracing back to Tichit's stone-walled fields. As we'll see next, another civilization gambled everything on a different kind of treasure, one that glittered beneath the waves. From the sun-baked fields of ancient Mauritania, we plunge into the turquoise waters of the Persian Gulf, where an entirely different kind of wealth once flourished. Here, the Jer, her civilization built an empire not on grain, but on treasures hidden beneath the waves' pearls. While the Tichit people mastered survival in arid lands, the Jehans turned the sea itself into their marketplace, becoming the Middle East's undisputed pearl kings for over 700 years. Greek historian Strabo marveled at Jerha's wealth, describing a city so rich that its houses were decorated with precious stones, mother of pearl, and even gold beams. But the real source of their fortune lay offshore, where free-diving fishermen risked their lives daily in a practice unchanged for millennia. Modern excavations near modern-day Bahrain reveal the ruins of their diving outposts, stone anchors, and ceramic air hoses used to supply oxygen to submerged divers hint at the scale of their operations. These weren't casual gatherers but professionals working in shifts, with ancient texts mentioning divers descending over 30 meters on a single breath. What set Jer apart was their sophisticated pearl banking system. Archaeologists have uncovered cuneiform tablets detailing loans backed by pearl collateral, proving they commoditized their harvest like a modern futures market. Divers received advance payments before the season, paying back creditors with pearls of predetermined sizes, a system demanding precise grading skills still used in Bahrain's pearl souks today. Their dominance was absolute. Roman accounts complain of Jehan pearls costing up to 50 million sesterces per strand, making them more expensive than entire warships. Yet this underwater gold rush may have sown the seeds of collapse. Core samples from oyster beds show a disturbing pattern. Older sediment layers contain abundant large pearls, while later strata yield only tiny, immature specimens. Marine biologists confirm this matches classic overharvesting divers taking oysters faster than they could reproduce. Contemporary reports mention Jehan fleets sailing farther each year, suggesting local depletion. By the 1st century Common Era, Roman naturalist Pliny noted Persian Gulf pearls had become small as pebbles, forcing elite buyers to seek alternatives from India's coasts. The final blow came from an unexpected direction, not the sea, but the sand. Satellite imaging reveals Jeha's harbors silted up rapidly, likely due to upstream agricultural expansion by rival powers. With no deep water access, their ships, and thus their trade networks stranded. Today, the remnants of their peerless pearling infrastructure lie buried under Saudi Arabia's eastern deserts, a cautionary tale of how even the most liquid wealth can dry up. As we'll soon discover, another civilization faced ruin when the very symbols of their power became too heavy to lift. Moving from the drowned pearls of Jeha, we now ascend to the highlands of Ethiopia, where a civilization turned stone into soaring symbols of faith and power. The Kingdom of Axum left behind one of archaeology's most spine-tingling mysteries. How did they transport monolithic obelisks, some weighing as much as 160 tons, across miles of rugged terrain without wheels or beasts of burden? These towering stelae, some reaching over 30 meters tall, were carved from single blocks of granite, polished to a mirror finish, and adorned with false doors and intricate carvings mimicking multi-story buildings. But their engineering feats didn't end at the quarry. Axumite builders had to move these colossal stones across arid plains and uneven slopes to their final positions, a task that would challenge modern machinery. Recent experiments by archaeologists reveal their likely method, a combination of pivots, sledges, and manpower on an industrial scale. Picture this: hundreds of workers levering the obelisk onto a wooden sledge, with ropes made from twisted hide anchoring it to teams of oxen. But here's the twist: they didn't drag the sledge directly. Instead, they laid down a track of smoothed logs, rolling the sledge forward while crews behind constantly relocated the logs to the front. Think of it like a treadmill made of timber, a system that minimized friction and maximized efficiency. This technique, paired with carefully calculated inclines, allowed them to move what amounted to a small building at a staggering pace up to half a kilometer per day. Yet Axum's obsession with these monuments may have contributed to its undoing. Each obelisk required vast quantities of granite, and core samples from the quarries near Gobadra Hill tell a grim story. Over centuries, the finest stone was exhausted, forcing builders to use fractured or poorer quality rock. Later stelae show cracks and uneven finishes, and some even collapsed during construction. This wasn't just an aesthetic crisis, it struck at the heart of Axum's identity. These obelisks weren't mere decorations, they were spiritual conduits, markers of royal legitimacy, and symbols of connection to the divine. As the stones grew smaller and rougher, so did Axum's influence. By the 7th century, the quarries were abandoned, and the kingdom's focus shifted to less tangible forms of power, trade, and religion. But the silent fields of fallen stelae remain, a stark reminder that even the mightiest civilizations can crumble when the resources that define them run dry. Next, we'll see how another culture's golden ambitions led to a revolt that shook the desert. Now let's journey south from the exhausted quarries of Axum into the heart of Nubia's deserts, where shimmering legends of gold lured empires to their edge. The Blemise, a nomadic warrior people described by Roman historians as headless men with faces in their chests, were far more than just a traveler's tall tale. They controlled some of the most lucrative gold mines of antiquity, hidden in the arid wastes between the Nile and the Red Sea. Roman maps like the Peutingers Table mark these sites with cryptic symbols, not just as sources of wealth, but as zones of danger where rebellion simmered under the scorching sun. The mines themselves were engineering marvels carved into the Nubian desert's bedrock. Workers, often enslaved captives from Roman raids or local tribes, tunneled hundreds of feet underground, propping up shafts with acacia wood that still survives in the dry air today. They followed quartz veins by torchlight, crushing ore with stone mortars and washing it in cleverly designed sluices that trapped gold dust while conserving precious water. But the real secret wasn't just the metal, it was the Blemise mastery of logistics. They moved gold along hidden desert tracks, using relay stations where camels could drink from concealed cisterns, keeping the routes invisible to Roman tax collectors. This system worked until the weight of empire pressed too hard. Roman accounts from the 4th century describe waves of revolts, not just among mine slaves but entire Blemise clans. A papyrus letter from a Roman garrison commander pleads for reinforcements, complaining that the desert itself has risen against us. Archaeologists found chilling evidence at the mines of Berenice, shackles deliberately pried open, tools abandoned mid-use, and even the remains of a smelted gold shipment melted into a useless lump, likely as sabotage. The message was clear: the people who powered this wealth machine were reclaiming their freedom. By the 5th century, the mines fell silent. Some scholars argue the Blemise deliberately collapsed tunnels to deny Rome further profit, while others point to climate shifts that dried up critical water sources. But the most intriguing clue comes from their descendants. The modern Beja people of the region still tell stories of ancestors who swallowed the gold back into the earth, a poetic nod to how swiftly and completely this desert civilization erased the traces of their exploitation. Unlike the towering stelae of Axum, the Blemise left no monuments, just whispers in Roman ledgers and the faint scars of pickaxes on stone, reminding us that even the richest empires can bleed out under a desert sun. Next, we'll see how another civilization's written words became their unwitting curse. Turning from the rebellious deserts of Nubia, we arrive at the muddy plains of southern Mesopotamia, where humanity's first written words emerged from an environmental crisis. The Sumerians didn't invent cuneiform to write poetry or record history. They created it out of sheer desperation as their fields turned white with salt. This wedge-shaped script, pressed into clay tablets by reed styluses, began as grocery lists for grain warehouses. But as irrigation canals brought not just water but creeping salinity, those early bookkeeping notes became a civilization's cry for help. Archaeologists at the ancient city of found stacks of these tablets documenting a slow-motion disaster. One bureaucrat's report from around 2100 BC reads like an obituary for farmland. It meticulously records crop yields dropping by nearly 2/3 over 50 years, with barley gradually replaced by more salt-tolerant wheat until even wheat failed. The scribes' precision was their tragedy. They could measure their doom in plummeting numbers but couldn't stop the alkaline tide. The genius of cuneiform was its adaptability. What started as tally marks evolved to capture loans, laws, and even lamentations. A haunting tablet from Lagash describes the black fields turning white, the earth cracking like a potter's kiln. Yet this very flexibility became a weakness. As salinity spread, temple administrators kept drafting more intricate irrigation schedules instead of changing tactics. Their tablets show them rotating fields, dredging canals deeper, even praying to Inki, god of fresh water, but never questioning the system itself. Recent soil analyses reveal the depth of their miscalculation. By repeatedly flooding fields to wash away salt, they only drove minerals deeper into the water table. A 4,000-year-old tablet from Umma boasts of increasing irrigation, a death sentence written in wedges. The scribes' own records betray them. One ledger shows half the workforce shifted from farming to salt processing, exporting it as a commodity while their children went hungry. What makes Sumer's collapse so poignant is that they left us the blueprint of their failure. The same bureaucracies that perfected writing became trapped by it, filing reports on dying fields while the Euphrates changed course. Their last tablets switched from barley counts to ration lists, then to desperate sales of temple statues for grain. The final stroke of irony, the very clay that preserved their words, came from the silt of those ruined fields. Next, we'll see how another civilization turned playgrounds into battlegrounds when drought struck. Now, let's leave the cracked clay tablets of Sumer behind and step onto the sun-baked courts of the Sonoran Desert, where the Hohokam turned play into politics. These master engineers, who carved over 1,000 miles of irrigation canals through Arizona's arid lands, also built something far more enigmatic: rubber ball courts echoing those of distant Mesoamerica. The largest at Casa Grande stretches nearly 200 feet long with sloped masonry walls, designed for a game that was anything but casual. Archaeologists scraping residue from these courts made a startling find: traces of natural rubber, a material the Hohokam couldn't produce locally. This rubber traveled over 1,000 miles from the tropical lowlands, likely traded through networks reaching Teotihuacan or the Maya. But these weren't just imports for sport. The ball game served as ritual warfare by proxy, where victories settled disputes without bloodshed. A Hohokam petroglyph at South Mountain shows two players flanked by spectators, one holding what might be a severed head, a motif straight from Mayan ball court carvings. Yet as droughts worsened in the 1200s, the game's stakes appear to have turned deadly. Excavations at the Gru site reveal crushed skulls near a ball court, victims of blunt force trauma matching rubber ball impact. Some skeletons show healed fractures, suggesting generations of ritualized violence. Then, around 1350, something changed. The last built courts lack spectator platforms, as if games became private affairs. A cache of 750 broken manos grinding stones found buried beneath one court hints at desperation. Were they offerings to bring rain or weapons repurposed? The Hohokam's final acts blur the line between ritual and revolt. At Pueblo Grande, archaeologists found a ball court deliberately filled with trash, including shattered pottery effigies of the very water deities they'd once prayed to. Perhaps the games, meant to maintain order, ultimately exposed the fractures in their society. When the last Hohokam walked away from their canals around 1450, they left behind defaced courts, some with gold rings pried loose, others with ceremonial trenches dug through their centers. These vandalized sites suggest a people who'd lost faith in the rules, both of the game and of the civilization it once held together. Next, we'll venture where isolation shaped bodies as well as cultures, to the windswept islands where Tasmania's original inhabitants survived as the world around them turned to desert. Shifting our gaze from the sun-scorched ball courts of Arizona, we now arrive at a land where isolation didn't just preserve culture, it transformed human biology itself. Tasmania's original inhabitants became unintended subjects in one of Earth's most extreme natural experiments when rising seas cut them off from mainland Australia around 12,000 years ago. Stranded on what was now an island, these hunter-gatherers faced more than cultural separation. Their very bodies adapted through a process called insular dwarfism. Examination of skeletal remains reveals adults standing barely 4 feet 11 inches tall on average, with bone density 20% higher than mainland Aboriginal populations. This wasn't malnutrition at work, but evolution's response to limited resources. Smaller bodies require fewer calories, and dense bones helped withstand the rugged terrain. Their tools tell the same story: tiny hand axes no larger than a child's palm, meticulously crafted for maximum efficiency. Even their teeth show unique wear patterns from processing tough, fibrous plants unavailable on the mainland. But their most controversial adaptation may have backfired catastrophically. Firestick farming, the deliberate burning of vegetation to encourage new growth, was practiced here with peculiar intensity. Pollen records from Lake Selina show charcoal layers alternating with drought-resistant plants, suggesting a cycle of burning that may have crossed an ecological threshold. Some researchers argue these controlled burns, intended to maintain grasslands for wallaby hunting, ultimately reduced the island's moisture retention. Core samples reveal that by 3,000 years ago, areas like the Central Plateau had transitioned from temperate rainforest to arid scrubland precisely when archaeological evidence shows population declines. The debate hinges on a chilling discovery in the Bone Cave system. Here, among the bones of extinct marsupial lions, lies a human skeleton dated to 2,800 years ago. Its teeth show signs of severe enamel defects indicative of childhood starvation. Nearby, fire-blackened sediments coincide with the disappearance of drought-sensitive plant species. Did their survival strategy become their undoing? Or was this simply an inevitable consequence of climate shifts that turned Tasmania's interior into a veritable desert? What remains undeniable is their resilience. When Europeans arrived in the 1700s, they encountered people whose material culture appeared simpler than mainland groups. No boomerangs, no barbed spears, yet who had perfected the art of surviving in one of Earth's most unpredictable environments. Their secret may lie in what wasn't found in archaeological sites. No evidence of warfare, no mass graves, just generations of people who adapted their bodies and their fire practices to an island that grew harsher with each passing century. Now let's turn our attention to the archer kings of Nubia, whose military prowess both defended and defined the desert kingdom of Kerma. Leaving behind the windswept shores of Tasmania, we step into the golden sands of Nubia, where the desert bore witness to a civilization that turned warfare into an art form. The Kingdom of Kerma, flourishing along the Nile around 2500 BC, produced some of history's most formidable archer kings, rulers who didn't just command armies but reshaped the very dynamics of power in ancient Africa. Tomb paintings from sites like Ducky Gel reveal startling details about their military ingenuity. Unlike the rigid formations of their Egyptian rivals, the Kerma archers fought in fluid, decentralized units. Their signature weapon, the composite bow, a layered masterpiece of wood, horn, and sinew that could pierce armor at 300 paces. But the true genius lay in their tactics. Tomb scenes depict archers kneeling behind lightweight shields made of giraffe hide, firing in rotating volleys that maintained relentless pressure on enemies. This wasn't just hunting adapted for war. It was a system refined through generations of clashes with desert nomads and Nile Valley rivals. The Egyptians learned this the hard way. Inscriptions at Buhan Fortress describe panic when Kerma's archers unleashed storms of arrows blackening the sun. But perhaps the most fascinating twist in this story comes from an unexpected source: Egyptian defectors. Papyrus records from the reign of Senusret III mention entire companies of Egyptian mercenaries switching sides, lured by Kerma's promise of land and status. These turncoats brought with them intimate knowledge of Egypt's fortifications and battle strategies, intel the Kerma kings exploited ruthlessly. At the desert fortress of Mergissa, archaeologists found evidence of this cultural exchange in the most visceral way possible. A cache of arrowheads buried in the ruins shows a hybrid design, Egyptian fletching techniques applied to Kerma-style broadheads. Even more telling, skeletal remains from the battlefield exhibit wounds consistent with both Egyptian piercing arrows and Kerma's distinctive barbed projectiles, proof that defectors were shooting at their former comrades. Yet for all their martial prowess, the Archer King's downfall came not from enemy spears but from the land itself. As the Nile's annual floods grew unpredictable, Kerma's agricultural base shrank, forcing over-reliance on military campaigns for resources. The final blow came when Egypt's new kingdom pharaohs, having studied Kerma's tactics for centuries, adapted. They recruited Nubian mercenaries of their own, turning Kerma's greatest strength against it. The tomb of Thutmose I at Deir el-Bahri even boasts of Nubian arrows now flying for Egypt, a bitter epitaph for the Archer kings who once made the desert tremble. Next, we venture east to the Tarim Basin, where the sands guard secrets of Caucasian mummies and vanished oasis cities. Now, shifting our gaze from the Archer kings of Nubia, we journey deep into the heart of Asia's Taklamakan Desert, where the scorching sands cradle one of archaeology's most startling discoveries, the Loulan kingdom. Here, preserved by the desert's dryness and sub-zero winters, lie the enigmatic Tarim mummies, fair-haired and tall, with European features that starkly contrast the surrounding region's modern populations. These mummies, some dating back nearly 4,000 years, wear intricately woven woolens and felted garments, their faces so well preserved you can still see the tattoos curling around their wrists. Genetic testing has unraveled a story even more surprising than their appearance. The Loulan people carried a mix of ancient North Eurasian and early East Asian ancestry, suggesting they were part of a much wider migratory web than previously imagined. Some specimens, like the famous Beauty of Loulan, share DNA markers with Bronze Age herders from the Siberian steppes, while others show links to populations as far west as the Caucasus. This genetic mosaic hints at a crossroads culture, one where light-haired traders from the distant grasslands met and mingled with settlers from the oases of Central Asia. But it's their clothing that offers an equally fascinating window into their world. Excavations at the Zio Cemetery revealed felted caps and cloaks so finely crafted they rival modern textiles. Scientists studying these artifacts made a breakthrough when they replicated the Loulan's felting technique using tools found frozen in permafrost. The process involved layering sheep's wool with camel hair, then pounding it with wooden mallets while intermittently wetting it with salty water, a method that created dense, weatherproof fabric ideal for desert survival. Remarkably, some garments were even dyed vibrant red using madder root, proving these weren't just practical items but expressions of identity. The mummy's tattoos tell another layer of the story. Geometric spirals on a male warrior's neck match patterns found on pottery from the Altai Mountains, while a woman's cheek markings mirror symbols used by the ancient Scythians. These weren't random decorations, they were likely markers of status, lineage, or spiritual beliefs, connecting the Loulan to cultural networks spanning thousands of miles. Yet for all their sophistication, the Loulan people vanished as mysteriously as they appeared. The same sands that preserved their bodies also swallowed their cities. Oases that once sustained their farms dried up when rivers shifted course, leaving behind salt-encrusted ruins. By the time the Han Dynasty chronicles mention Loulan in the 2nd century BC, it was already a ghost kingdom, its people scattered, its legacy buried beneath dunes that still whisper secrets to those who dare to listen. Next, we turn to the towering stelae of Axum, where another desert civilization reached for the heavens before its own dramatic fall. But before we leave the mysteries of the Tarim Basin behind, let's journey southwest to the arid plains of Yemen, where an engineering marvel once turned desert into farmland until nature struck back with devastating force. The Marib Dam, a colossal structure built by the Sabian civilization around 800 BC, wasn't just a barrier against water. It was a lifeline, transforming the Wadi Dona into a fertile crescent that sustained tens of thousands. What made this dam extraordinary were its sluice gates, described in ancient inscriptions as the hands of the moon god. Archaeologists reverse engineering these gates from carvings found at the Olmeca temple discovered they used an ingenious counterweight system. Massive limestone blocks, each weighing as much as 2 elephants, could be raised or lowered by teams of workers using ropes and pulleys. This allowed precise control over water flow, diverting it through a network of canals to irrigate fields of frankincense trees and wheat. For centuries, this system turned the desert into the green land celebrated in Sabian poetry. But the dam's brilliance also contained the seeds of its downfall. Sediment cores drilled from the reservoir bed reveal a fatal flaw. Every flood season, the rushing waters carried silt from the highlands which settled behind the dam. Over time, this created a ticking time bomb. Engineers likely cleaned the silt initially, inscriptions mention the purification rites of the sluices, but as the kingdom grew, maintenance lagged. By the 6th century AD, the reservoir had lost nearly half its depth to accumulated silt. Then came the catastrophe. A medieval Arab historian, Al-Hamdani, described the final breach. The flood came like a black serpent, swallowing first the spillways, then the gates. Hydraulic models based on his account suggest the silt had piled so high that water overtopped the dam's crest, eroding its earthen core. When the structure failed, it unleashed a wall of water and mud that obliterated farmland for miles downstream. The Quran itself references this disaster, calling it a punishment for the Sabians' arrogance. Yet the dam's legacy isn't just one of ruin. Modern engineers studying its remains have uncovered lessons about sustainable water management. The Sabians' use of spillways to dissipate energy from floods predates Roman hydraulic science by centuries, and their canals, lined with waterproof plaster made from volcanic ash, were so durable that some still trace faint lines across the desert today. Now let's turn to the weapon workshops of the Toltec Chichimca, where desert survival depended not on water, but on mastering another scarce resource, stone. Now, shifting our focus from water to warfare, let's venture into the sun-baked badlands of northern Mexico, where the Toltec Chichimca peoples turned barren landscapes into arsenals. Unlike the Sabians, who thrived by mastering water, these desert dwellers survived by dominating another critical resource, flint. Hidden in the arid hills of modern-day Zacatecas and San Luis Potosi lie vast quarry networks where generations of craftsmen chiseled razor-sharp blades from the earth's bones. What made these mines extraordinary wasn't just the volume of flint extracted. Estimates suggest thousands of tons over centuries, but the precision of their craft. Archaeologists examining workshop debris found micro-layers of stone flakes, revealing a production line so efficient it rivaled industrial methods. Artisans would heat the flint in controlled fires, making it easier to fracture into preforms. Then, using antler tools, they'd pressure flake edges into lethal points. The result, arrowheads so uniform that variations rarely exceed 2 millimeters, even across different sites. But flint was more than a tool, it was power. Chemical fingerprinting studies show these weapons traveled far beyond the desert, turning up in Maya cities like Chichen Itza and even among the Pueblones of the American Southwest. This wasn't casual trade. Inscriptions at Chala describe the Toltec Chichimca as the masters of the gray gold, demanding tribute in jade and feathers for their flint. Their dominance, however, bred resentment. Aztec codices recount wars sparked by rival groups raiding the quarries, with one battle described as the day the Flint Mountains wept blood. The true cost of this resource warfare emerged when droughts struck in the 12th century. As springs dried up, mining became impossible without water to control dust and cool tools. Skeletal remains from this period show rampant malnutrition, suggesting that flint, once a lifeline, had become a curse. Communities fractured, with some migrating east to merge with the rising Aztec Empire, while others retreated into nomadic bands. Yet their legacy endures in unexpected ways. Modern metallurgists studying Toltec Chichimca flint knapping techniques have adapted their methods for crafting surgical tools, proving that even in collapse, these desert innovators left gifts for the future. Next, we'll uncover how another civilization turned wind and dust into a canvas for spiritual expression. Now, let's journey from the flint-strewn battlefields of Mexico to the windswept deserts of ancient Gandhara, where art and spirituality fused in ways that still captivate us today. Nestled in what is now northern Pakistan and eastern Afghanistan, Gandhara was a crossroads of cultures where Greek, Persian, and Buddhist influences collided, and the harsh desert climate played an unexpected role in preserving their legacy. The region's most striking treasures are its stucco statues, delicate yet enduring. Desert winds, often seen as destructive, became accidental conservators here. As monasteries crumbled, the same arid gusts that buried buildings in dust also encased sculptures in a protective layer, shielding them from humidity and time. Archaeologists uncovering these statues marvel at their crisp details. The folds of Greco-Roman robes draped over Buddha's shoulders, the serene faces bearing the chiseled features of classical Greek art. One particularly well-preserved statue from Tactiba shows Hercules reimagined as Vajrapani, Buddha's protector, his club replaced by a thunderbolt, a vivid symbol of cultural blending. But Gandhara's artistic brilliance was tied to a fragile lifeline, the Silk Road. For centuries, this network of trade routes funneled wealth into the region, funding monasteries that doubled as artistic workshops. Tax records carved on clay tablets reveal how merchants donated gold for gilding statues, while pilgrims paid for elaborate reliefs depicting Buddha's life. Yet when the Silk Road's arteries began to clog, first due to political upheavals in Persia, then from the rise of sea trade, Gandhara's economy gasped for breath. The collapse was slow but merciless. By the 7th century, monastic complexes like Jamal Garhi stood half-empty, their scriptoriums silent. Carbon dating of abandoned manuscripts shows monks left in waves, some fleeing eastward as the desert reclaimed their oasis towns. A poignant clue lies in the Hadda monastery, where a half-finished statue of Maitreya, the future Buddha, was found. Its sculptor's tools still scattered nearby, as if work stopped mid-chisel. Yet Gandhara's influence refused to die. Its artistic style hitchhiked along refugee routes, reshaping Buddhist art from China to Japan. Today, as conservators painstakingly restore wind-scarred stucco, they're not just preserving art, they're decoding a lesson in how even the harshest deserts can nurture beauty and how collapse can scatter seeds of renewal. Next, we'll explore how another civilization's social hierarchy may have sown the seeds of its own undoing. Turning our gaze from Gandhara's windswept monasteries, we arrive at the sun-baked stone walls of West Africa's Tchit-Walata settlements, where the very architecture tells a tale of social unraveling. Nestled in what is now Mauritania, these labyrinthine compounds, some dating back over 3,500 years, reveal a civilization that thrived in the desert through meticulous order, only to crumble under the weight of its own divisions. Archaeologists mapping these ruins noticed something striking. House sizes weren't random. The largest compounds, some with walls over 2 meters high and multiple courtyards, clustered near central granaries, while smaller, single-room dwellings radiated outward like spokes on a wheel. This wasn't accidental urban planning, it was a physical manifestation of class. The elite lived closest to food stores, their homes built with finely fitted stone, while laborers' quarters featured cruder masonry. Even livestock pens followed this hierarchy, with prized cattle kept in shaded enclaves near elite residences, while goats were relegated to the settlement's dusty fringes. But what truly exposes the tensions beneath this system are the hidden defenses. Excavations at Tichet uncovered arrowheads stockpiled in elite courtyards, along with traces of barricades erected inward, not against external raids but internal uprisings. One collapsed wall bears charring patterns suggesting it was deliberately burned from within. Meanwhile, isotopic analysis of skeletons tells a grim nutritional tale. Elite graves show diets rich in millet and beef, while commoner remains reveal reliance on wild grasses during droughts. The message is clear: when resources grew scarce, the privileged hoarded and the marginalized starved. The breaking point came around 1200 BCE. Pollen samples from abandoned granaries show a sudden shift from millet to drought-resistant wild grasses, a desperate adaptation as the elites over-irrigation exhausted fragile soils. Then, the ultimate irony: the very walls meant to signify status became death traps. As sand dunes encroached, the tallest compounds, those of the ruling class, were buried first, their heavy stone roofs collapsing under the weight of advancing desert. Meanwhile, simpler dwellings on the outskirts, built with lighter materials, were more easily abandoned. Yet even in collapse there's a lesson. Modern Mauritanian nomads still use fragments of Tichet Walata's stone walls as seasonal landmarks, unknowingly walking the same social fissures that doomed their ancestors. As we'll see next, another civilization's trade networks may have carried not just goods, but their downfall. Shifting our focus from West Africa's crumbling hierarchies, we journey north to the Sahara, where the Garamantes, once masters of underground water systems, left behind a puzzle in the form of shattered Roman amphorae. These clay wine jars, unearthed by the thousands in Libya's Fezzan region, tell a story not just of trade but of a civilization caught between opulence and peril. The Garamantes, as we've seen earlier, were desert agricultural innovators, but their elite class developed a taste for Mediterranean luxuries. Excavations at their capital, Garama, revealed warehouses stacked with amphorae stamped with marks from Campania and Crete, evidence of a booming wine trade that spanned the 1st to 4th centuries CE. But here's the twist: these jars weren't just discarded. Many were deliberately broken and buried in pits near temples, suggesting ritual libations or perhaps even attempts to ward off misfortune. Chemical residue analyses add another layer. While some amphorae held expected traces of grape derivatives, others tested positive for lead concentrations 50 times higher than natural levels. Historians now suspect the Garamantes' wealthy class drank wine deliberately sweetened with lead syrup, a Roman delicacy with devastating consequences. Skeletal remains from elite tombs show telltale signs of lead poisoning: brittle bones, fused vertebrae, and even lead deposits in tooth enamel. But the amphorae carried more than poisoned wine. Recent genetic studies of Garamonte burial sites detected traces of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium behind the plague of Justinian, in skeletons dating to the trade's peak. This raises a chilling possibility: Roman trade ships, which also transported grain and cloth, might have brought plague-infested rats to Garamonte ports along with their wine. The timing aligns eerily. The Garamontes' decline accelerated just as this pandemic ravaged the Mediterranean. Yet the greatest irony lies in the desert sands themselves. As Roman demand for exotic goods waned in the 5th century CE, the Garamantes doubled down on wine imports, even as their Fagara's underground canals clogged with silt. Their last rulers, skeletons showing both lead poisoning and plague markers, were found surrounded by amphorae shards, a civilization that perished in part by drinking the poison of their own prosperity. As we'll discover next, another desert power faced collapse not from imported plagues, but from the very monuments meant to immortalize them. Now let's turn our attention from poisoned wine to trembling earth as we uncover how the Nabateans of Petra faced nature's fury. While the Garamantes succumbed to imported crises, this rock-carved civilization grappled with a far more visible threat: earthquakes. Petra's cliff faces still bear scars from ancient seismic battles, revealing a society that both mastered and was ultimately mastered by the land. The Nabateans built their desert capital with remarkable foresight. Their iconic tombs and temples, carved directly into rose-red sandstone cliffs, incorporated subtle but ingenious seismic adaptations. Engineers shaped doorways with trapezoidal frames instead of right angles, a design that better distributes shock waves. Pillars were often slightly tilted inward, creating a self-reinforcing structure during tremors. Even their famous water channels, which snaked through narrow canyons, included flexible terracotta pipe sections that could shift without shattering. These innovations allowed Petra to weather countless quakes during its golden age, a testament to Nabatean ingenuity. But Byzantine chronicles tell a darker story from the 7th century CE. The historian Theophylact Simocatta recorded a devastating quake in 551 that toppled half the stone city, while later tremors in 639 reportedly collapsed entire necropolises. Modern archaeologists have matched these accounts to physical evidence. Several royal tombs show repairs with cruder masonry, suggesting declining technical knowledge. Most telling are the later Roman-era additions, heavy marble facades grafted onto the original sandstone structures. These imposing but rigid decorations became fatal liabilities when the ground shook. Petra's final centuries reveal a civilization out of sync with its environment. Where early Nabateans respected the sandstone's natural fissures, building around weaknesses, later rulers ignored these lessons. The great temple complex, expanded in the Roman period, sprawled across an active fault line. Excavations here uncovered crushed columns lying in perfect radial patterns, a silent witness to the sideways thrust of tectonic plates. Recent LiDAR scans even detected an entire collapsed forum, hidden under debris since that 551 quake. What emerges is a paradox of survival. The Nabateans' earliest adaptations echo Japan's earthquake-resistant pagodas, flexible, lightweight, and attuned to the land. Yet their later emulation of Roman grandeur introduced vulnerabilities. As we'll soon see, another desert civilization's fate would hinge not on surviving earthquakes, but on deciphering the warnings etched into their own writing system. Shifting from the seismic struggles of Petra, we arrive at a mystery locked in symbols, the undeciphered script of the Indus Valley civilization. While the Nabateans left behind towering stone monuments, this Bronze Age society inscribed their legacy on delicate seals and tablets, creating a puzzle that modern scholars are still racing to solve. The Indus script, etched onto thousands of tiny steatite seals and pottery fragments, remains one of archaeology's most stubborn enigmas. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform broken centuries ago, these 4,000-year-old symbols resist all traditional decipherment methods. But recent breakthroughs are emerging from an unlikely ally: artificial intelligence. Teams at the University of Washington and Mumbai's Tata Institute have employed machine learning to analyze the script's patterns. The AI doesn't translate directly, but it reveals startling structural rules. The script follows strict sequences, with certain symbols always appearing at the beginning of texts, others clustered like numbers, and some acting as terminal marks. This isn't random graffiti. It's a highly organized system, possibly combining logographic and syllabic elements, much like modern Japanese writing. Yet complexity may have been the civilization's undoing. At the urban center of Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists uncovered administrative halls stuffed with seal impressions, each bearing nearly identical inscriptions. This suggests an obsession with bureaucratic control. Every traded jar, every grain shipment, every artisan's work seems to have required meticulous documentation. Some researchers, like Cambridge's Dr. Rita Wright, argue this created systemic fragility. When climate change disrupted agriculture around 1900 BC, the system couldn't adapt. The script's very uniformity, a strength during stable times, may have stifled innovation when drought struck. Intriguingly, the seals grow simpler as the civilization declines. Later examples from smaller settlements like Dolivera show abbreviated texts as if scribes were cutting corners. Was this a loss of institutional knowledge or a conscious rejection of red tape? The AI analysis reveals another clue. The script's combinatorial possibilities shrank over centuries. By 1800 BC, it wasn't just the rivers drying up. The civilization's capacity for expressive writing was evaporating too. This presents a haunting parallel to Petra's later years. Both civilizations clung to systems that once ensured survival, but eventually became burdens. Where the Nabateans doubled down on rigid Roman aesthetics, the Indus Valley may have suffocated under its own administrative weight. As we'll soon see, another lost culture took the opposite approach. The Bactrians, whose flexible trade networks allowed their script to evolve rather than collapse. As we step away from the fading ink of the Indus Valley, our journey takes us north to the windswept deserts of Central Asia, where the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex, known as B-Mac, left behind a different kind of written record. Here, trade wasn't just documented in symbols but stamped into clay with intricate cylinder seals, rolling out administrative control across the Silk Road's earliest routes. These seals, unearthed from sites like Gona Tepe in Turkmenistan, reveal a society obsessed with trade efficiency. Each one, no larger than a thumb, bears elaborate designs, mythical griffins, scorpion men, and ziggurates pressed into clay to mark goods, shipments, and storage containers. What makes them extraordinary isn't just their artistry but their function. Unlike the Indus script, which remained static, B-Mac seals evolved dramatically over centuries. Early versions show local motifs, but by 2000 BC, they incorporate Mesopotamian and Harappan influences, proving Bactria was a cultural crossroads. The real game changer, though, was the camel. Recent isotope studies from the University of Oxford show that B-Mac trade networks exploded precisely when dromedary camels were domesticated around 1900 BC. These animals could carry 500 pounds across arid stretches without water for weeks, enabling Bactrian merchants to connect the Indus Valley to Mesopotamia. But camels brought chaos too. As caravans grew faster and farther reaching, the old seal system strained to keep up. Archaeologists find later seals crammed with extra symbols, as if bureaucrats were scrambling to label an ever-expanding web of goods. This adaptability had limits. At the site of Dashli III in Afghanistan, excavations uncovered a warehouse filled with seal-impressed jars, all smashed in a single violent event. Some scholars, like Dr. Frederick Hebert, argue this wasn't invasion but revolt. Camel-powered trade enriched elites while displacing traditional donkey caravaneers. The seals, once symbols of order, became emblems of inequality. By 1600 BC, the system collapsed so completely that later seals are crude imitations, their once precise glyphs dissolving into abstract scratches. It's a stark contrast to the Indus Valley's rigid bureaucracy. Where one civilization fractured under inflexibility, Bactria's downfall came from too much change too fast. Yet both stories whisper the same warning. In the desert, survival hinges on balance. As we'll see next, even the most resilient cultures could tip that scale, sometimes with something as simple as a grain of salt. Now we turn our gaze to the American Southwest, where the Fremont people left behind a haunting visual diary of their struggle against a changing world. Scattered across Utah's canyon walls, their pictographs are more than art, they're a stark chronicle of desperation and conflict. One panel in 9 Mile Canyon, dubbed the battle scene, shows stick-figure warriors with bows drawn, arrows flying toward a cluster of figures with distinctive horned headdresses. Archaeologists once assumed these were ritual scenes, but dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, reveals a grimmer truth. The University of Arizona's Tree Ring Lab matched these paintings to a 70-year megadrought beginning around 1050 CE. Juniper logs from Fremont pit houses show stunted growth rings, indicating years of failed rains. At the same time, the pictographs shift. earlier drawings depict corn plants and antelope hunts. Later ones show shields, torches, and figures with missing limbs. In Range Creek Canyon, a panel dubbed The Wounded Man depicts a figure with 6 arrows in his torso, surrounded by spear-wielding attackers. The pigments used, red ochre mixed with pinon resin, date precisely to the drought's peak. What makes these conflicts so revealing is their timing. Fremont villages were traditionally scattered, with families farming small plots near springs. But as the drought deepened, archaeologists find evidence of consolidation. At Five Finger Ridge, a site that housed 200 people, storage pits hold maize cobs half the normal size, likely harvested from stunted crops. Defensive walls appear, some built atop earlier granaries. Most telling are the petroglyphs near these fortified sites. At McConkey Ranch, a mural shows a line of archers firing toward a stylized village, its dwellings marked with dots that may represent burning embers. Yet the Fremont's downfall wasn't just violence. Tree rings from the Uinta Basin show a brief return of rains around 1100 CE, but by then their society had fractured. Some groups may have joined ancestral Pueblones to the south, while others likely adopted nomadic Numic lifestyles. The last known Fremont pictograph near Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry shows a lone figure holding a basket walking away from a field of withered corn. Below it, someone later scratched Numic symbols, a poignant overlap of cultures in a land where survival meant adaptation. As we close this exploration of 50 lost civilizations, remember this: whether in Bactria's trade halls or Utah's canyons, deserts amplify both human ingenuity and human fragility. Their stories aren't just footnotes in history, they're mirrors reflecting our own precarious balance with nature. The echoes of these lost civilizations speak to us across the ages, revealing a hauntingly familiar pattern. Whether it was the Nabateans' cracked cisterns in Petra, the Hohokams' empty canals in Arizona, or the Garamantes' dried-up fagaras in the Sahara, water management failures were often the first domino to fall. These societies thrived by defying their environments, only to collapse when those carefully balanced systems fractured. Trade routes, too, proved fragile. The Jehan's pearl diving economy vanished when Roman ships changed course, while Ubar's frankincense fortunes sank into the sands with shifting caravan paths. And always, relentlessly, climate was the silent architect of destiny. The Indus Valley's monsoon failures, the Fremont's 70-year drought, the Moche's biblical floods, each civilization grappled with shifts we now recognize as part of Earth's long-term rhythms. Today, the neon sprawl of Phoenix or the gleaming towers of Dubai might seem worlds apart from mud-brick ruins, but the parallels are unsettling. Arizona's Sieppe Canal system, the modern answer to the Hohokams' irrigation, pumps Colorado River water through deserts just as the Nabateans funneled rainwater through Petra's siphon tunnels. Yet reservoirs like Lake Mead now sit at record lows, mirroring the silt-choked fate of Marib Dam. Our global supply chains, though more complex than the Silk Road, face similar vulnerabilities. A single blocked canal in Suez or a pandemic disrupting ports echoes how the Bactria Margiana cities starved when the Amu Darya River changed course. This isn't just history, it's a blueprint. Archaeologists armed with LiDAR and sediment cores are now uncovering solutions these ancient cultures devised. The Tichet people's millet terraces could inspire drought-resistant farming in Niger. Petra's runoff capturing pavements might revolutionize desert-urban design. Even the Fremont's pictographs with their visceral drought warnings serve as a reminder. Adaptation isn't about permanence but resilience, so here's your invitation. Visit Chaco Canyon's aligned ruins or Petra's rose-red gorges not just as a tourist but as a witness. Support digs like those unearthing the Garamantes Fagara tunnels, where every shovelful of sand reveals forgotten ingenuity. Or simply trace satellite images of the Thar Desert, spotting the geometric ghosts of Indus Valley outposts. These sites aren't graves, they're classrooms. And as the next chapter of arid lands unfolds with desalination plants and solar farms rising where pyramids once stood, their lessons have never been more urgent. Hit that subscribe button to join us as we keep unearthing humanity's lost playbooks for survival, because in the end, deserts don't erase civilizations. They preserve their hardest-won wisdom.